So today's story is a very creepy one. In fact, it's so unsettling at times that you're very likely going to think it's just fake. But there was a pretty incredible discovery that was made in the early 1900s that very likely means this story is true. But before we get into that incredible campfire story, as you can see, I'm literally sitting by a campfire. And honestly, it was just because, what I sort of do is I tell scary campfire stories a lot of the times. But I never actually sit by a fire. And so we decided, why not literally make a campfire and tell a spooky story by it. And if this vibe is something you guys like, I'm more than happy to do more of these because this sort of breaks it up. It's cool. It sort of adds a new flavor to the channel. And so let us know if you enjoy this vibe and we'll do more. And I think that generally speaking, when we do literal campfire stories, I'm going to lean towards the stories that are of the spookier variety. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right campfire because that's all we do. And we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come to your campfire and cook some s'mores with you. But don't tell them you've secretly put firecrackers in their marshmallows. Okay, let's get into today's story. Hundreds of years ago, there was this young indigenous warrior who was on his way to the center of his village. And his village was located in this heavily forested rolling hills area of modern-day Richland County, Wisconsin. He was a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. It was this indigenous tribe, and that's where they called home. And as this young warrior, this strong, brave young man is walking towards the village center, he had been called there by his tribal chief. He sort of had an idea of why he was being called there. And sure enough, when he got to the village center and he sees his tribal chief, who's standing there with 9 of the other strongest and bravest men of the tribe, this warrior knew, his hunch was correct. So 2 days earlier, 3 teenage boys that were members of this tribe, they had gone out deer hunting in the wilds right outside of their village. Again, this is a heavily forested, beautiful rolling hills area. And these teenagers had not come back. They had just been gone now for 48 hours, and their respective families were worried. And they had been, telling the tribal chief that they really needed to send out a search party for them, but the chief had sort of held off, in part because it wasn't entirely uncommon for hunters, even young hunters, to go out for a couple of days at a time. But the family, they had a bad feeling about it. And so finally, the tribal chief relented 2 days in, and he was calling a search party together to go look for these young men. And so the warrior who's walked into the village center here, he was being asked by the tribal chief to lead this search party effort. He was going to be in charge of these 9 other men. And so, the warrior, in truth, he sort of felt like it was overkill to put together this huge search party for these teenagers that in his mind he really did think they were just fine, but he didn't want to undermine the tribal chief, and so he said, of course, I'll go do it. And so the warrior, along with the 9 other strong, brave members of the tribe, they gather up some weapons and some food and water because they didn't know how long the search was going to take. They said goodbye to the members of the village, and then they exited the village in the same direction that basically all the hunters would go when they would go on hunting expeditions. There was like sort of a well-worn path that led out into the wilds of the forest. And so the warrior, who's again leading this search party, he was a skilled hunter himself. And as he's walking along this well-worn trail, he quickly found the tracks of these teenage boys. So they identified the tracks. And, right away, the warrior's thinking, this is going to be, no big deal. We're going to follow these tracks. We're going to find the kids. They probably are out camping somewhere. We'll give them a stern talking to and bring them back home, and that'll be that. But, as they're following the tracks along the well-worn trail, eventually the tracks, they deviate and they leave the trail. and they start kind of veering off into not really uncharted territory, but certainly areas that were not necessarily known for good hunting. This tribe they were prolific hunters, and so they knew this area extremely well, and they really had the designated areas that were the best. And so already they're seeing that these boys, they're doing something different, or they're doing something that's not advantageous for hunting. But either way, they're following these tracks that are going for miles and miles just into the wild. And also, as they're moving along here, they start to notice that there's no point at which the boys stopped. There's no, tracks that indicated they came to a stop and rested, or, stood still and tried to kill a deer or something. It was like they were just on a mission, hiking deep into the wilds. And so, the warrior's keeping a lot of these insights to himself, and he's just following the tracks. But after hours of this, when they still have not found the boys, they eventually found themselves at the top of this ravine. And as they're looking down into it, they realize that they've gone so far, not only away from their village, but so far off, the beaten paths that they were familiar with from all their hunting, that they knew this was an area that they really had never been to before, and they had no idea, what was down in the ravine or what was beyond. I mean, this is sort of uncharted territory for the warrior and the search party. But what they did know is that the tracks of these teenage boys continued down into this ravine, and so down the ravine they went. And then when they got to the bottom of this steep ravine, the trees kind of cleared out a little bit, and right in front of them, where the tracks continued, is this opening to a cave. And it's so dark inside that they really have no sense of how far back it goes or anything, but they see the tracks that they're following of the teenagers lead into that cave. But there are no tracks coming back out again. And so presumably the teenage boys, for reasons totally unknown, have hiked all the way out here, have gone into that cave, and that's where they are. But again, from the outside, the warrior and the others, they can't see these teenagers. And so naturally, the group, they walk up to the mouth of the cave, and even up close, it's starting to get a little bit dark outside, but there's still some daylight. Even up close, they can't see very far into the cave. It's just very dark. I mean, it's clearly big enough inside that you could walk for a great distance, or a pretty decent distance, but at some point it must sort of bend off and go in a different direction, and they can't see the teenagers inside of there. And so the warrior at this point, has a level of apprehension here, because he doesn't know this cave. He doesn't know this area. He doesn't know what's happened to these teenagers. He doesn't know if they're okay or not in there. He doesn't know if there's a predator or something inside of this cave. And so what he does is he decides, okay, I'm going to send 2 of my men of the search party in there to scout this out, and the rest of us will stay out here and just wait. And so he designates the 2 who say okay, and they go into the cave. And so the warrior and the 7 other men that he's with are just standing outside of the cave, and they're listening intently, because these 2 men that are going in, they're calling out the names of the missing teenagers. They're yelling, and all they can hear from the outside is just the sound of the 2 men yelling. They're not hearing any response from the teenagers. It's just quiet inside of the cave. And again, from the warrior and the other search party members' perspective, they can only see the 2 men that have gone in for a little while, and then they kind of disappear into the darkness, but they can still kind of hear them. And so they're calling out for the boys' names, they're calling and calling. And then around the same time that the warrior and the others he was with lost sight of the 2 men that went in looking for the boys, at the same time that they lost sight of them, they stopped making noise. It's like the cave went completely silent. And so for about 5 minutes or so, the warrior and the others, they're just kind of anxiously waiting, what's going on in there, but it's completely silent. 10 minutes goes by, and then 15, and it is dead silence. There's nothing coming out of the cave. It's just eerily quiet. And so the warrior at this point, he tells the others to stay put, and he just steps a little ways into the cave, just enough that, he was sort of inside the entrance of the cave. And he began calling out the name of the 2 men who went in. Now they're missing as well. He's calling their names out. As he's yelling their names, it's sort of echoing through what appears to be a vast cave system. But there's no response, at least not at first. If there had been no response, it would have told him at least, okay, maybe they're hurt, or they're too far away, I can't hear them. But instead, he did get a sort of response, but he couldn't make any sense of it. He heard what sounded like a wailing sound coming from deep inside of this cave, way, way deep inside, this wail that at first it sounded like one voice, and then it sounded like multiple voices kind of layered on top of each other. And then, with this sudden realization, the warrior understood what he was hearing. It wasn't a cry. He was hearing a chant. And it was a very particular chant, very particular to the Ho-Chunk Nation. It was the chant that warriors did before they died. It was literally known as the death song. And as soon as the main warrior is hearing the death song being chanted deep inside of this cave, the other men he's with, these 7 others who know exactly what that song is, they all sprung forward and said, "What do? We have to go in. There's something wrong." And before the lead warrior could tell them what to do, 6 of the other men just charged into the cave, chasing down their brothers, because they believe they're about to die. They would never be singing that song, chanting that song, if they weren't in real danger. And so the lead warrior and the one other guy that stayed back, they stayed put, just kind of waiting to see what would happen. And they're listening to these 6 others, go running into the cave, and they disappear into the darkness, and they're yelling over and over again for their brothers, and they can still hear that chanting, that death song reverberating off the walls. But then suddenly the cave goes silent again. The chanting stops. All the calling from the 6 men that went in, that stopped too. It's silent again. And it's just the lead warrior still in the mouth of the cave next to the one guy, and now they're scared. And they're just listening for anything, but it's just completely quiet. And then, before the lead warrior or the other guy could do anything, that rhythmic chanting began again, the death song. But now it was clearly far more than just a couple of voices. It was this rhythmic, loud, multiple voices layered on top of each other deep inside of this cave, chanting the death song over and over again. At this point, the lead warrior and the other, he had a decision to make. Deep down, he knew it was his responsibility, his moral responsibility here. It was code to go in there, and if you have to, sacrifice yourself to get these guys out of there. But he also thought, logically, something bad is happening inside of this cave, and if me and the other go in there right now, we're not coming out again, and no one's going to know what happened. There will be no saving. Everyone's just going to perish. And so even though it sort of went against every fiber in his body, the lead warrior, as this death song is reverberating off the walls, he and the other, they turned and they ran miles and miles all the way back to their village. And by the time they got there, it was dark out, and they, breathlessly told the tribal chief what had happened. And he said, "Tomorrow, first thing in the morning, first light, we're going to go back to that cave and we're going to get those boys out of there." And so sure enough, the next morning at first light, the tribal chief, the lead warrior, and the other man that he was with, the 2 that had come running back from the cave, they, along with about 100 other members of this village, they banded together and out into the wild they went, retracing these steps all the way back to the cave. And when they got there, the cave was still, it was quiet, there was still light outside, but there was no sign that anybody had come back out of the cave. All the tracks that went into the cave still had not come back out again. So they believe at this point, still, their loved ones are in this cave. They don't know what's happened to them, but they're in there and they have to figure out what's going on. Now at this point, the lead warrior didn't really know what the plan was. I mean, he remembered what happened the day before, and really anybody who went into the cave was seemingly swallowed whole. And so he didn't really have a sense of how they were going to do this. But the tribal chief, he spoke up and he said, "I have a plan. We're not gonna break up into groups and go into this cave onesie-twosie and see what happens. We're gonna go as one big group. We're gonna lock hands in one big line so that we're always connected. Never let go of the person's hands that are left and right of you. And the lead warrior and the other man, they're gonna lead us into the cave in the direction of where they heard their brothers when they went in there. And we're all gonna trail, and as one, we're gonna walk into this cave until we find our missing people, and we're gonna get them out of there." And so the lead warrior thought this was actually a brilliant idea. We'll all be together. We'll be holding on to each other. Nothing can happen to us this way. And so the lead warrior was second in line. The man who was leading the line was basically the other guy he was with, the 2 that had run back. He was the other guy. So he's in front. The lead warrior is second. He's locked hands with this guy. And then behind him is basically about 100 other people, all, holding onto each other's hands, one big line. And when they were ready, the lead warrior and the man in front of him, they began moving into this cave. And so into the cave they went. And as they're walking, they can tell pretty quickly that the cave, it sort of turns to the right. You have to walk in, maybe 50 or so feet into the cave, but then it sharp rights. And so there's enough light coming in that you can basically walk all the way up to that turn. But then when the lead warrior and the man in front of him made that sharp right and they began walking that way, it was utterly pitch black. No light reached that section of the tunnel. But, they're leading the line, and so they're still just moving along, and the whole line's following them pretty slowly. And as they're walking, the lead warrior, it's like he kept trying to blink his eyes to just try to capture anything, but he can't see anything. It is pitch black, and he's just gripping onto the men in front and behind him as tight as he can to show solidarity, like we're here together, we're going to be okay. And as they're walking, the lead guy kept calling out the names of the many men at this point that were lost in this cave, but there's no response. And as they're walking and shuffling along, again, they can't see anything, the walls are getting tight. They hear from somewhere deep in the cave the death song. The chant begins low and slow, and it begins to build and gets louder and louder and louder. And at this point, because they're all locked together, you can't really get out very quickly. They're well into the cave at this point. They can't see anything, and it's like the walls are echoing, and it's booming in their chest, this chant that's only done when you're on the brink of death. And so as they're walking along, the lead warrior, he's trying to grip as hard as he can to the man in front and behind him, showing them, keep going, it's gonna be okay. But then he felt the hand of the man in front of him, the line leader, go slack. And before he could grab it again, the man's hand was out of his. And he's reaching out in front of him, and he can't see him, but he can't feel him either. It was like he vanished. And so now the lead warrior, he's the front of the line. He has no idea what's going on. And he wants to just stop and turn and leave. It's getting so overwhelming. And he's about to do that, but he just feels like there's this force pulling him deeper into the cave. And then before he can do anything else, he opens his mouth and he begins to chant the death song. At the same time this is happening, deep inside of this cave, the tribal chief, along with a couple of others who had not joined the line, they were still outside of the cave. They've heard something going on in the cave, but it's dull. They can't really hear too much. There's something going on, but there's 100 people walking into the cave. They presumed there'd be noise. But suddenly, there was this obvious commotion, panic, erupting from deep inside of the cave. And before he knew it, all these people are coming running out of the cave, scared to death. They come bombing out of the cave. And at this point, the tribal chief knows something horrible's happened, and so he rounds everybody up. He does a head count and realizes over a dozen people are gone. They did not come back out again. And the cave that minutes ago was full of this death song and chaos and panic is silent once again. At this point, the tribal chief sort of designated that it must be the case that there's something evil inside of this cave. There's an evil spirit, there's something in this cave that is taking our people and they're vanishing. They're being swallowed whole by this cave. It's evil. And so from that moment, he forbid anyone from the tribe of ever stepping foot in this cave again. We cannot lose anyone else. Our best bet is to go back to the village and hope that these men, these brave warriors, eventually find their way out again. And so the tribal chief and the rest of these devastated villagers, back to the village they went. And over the next couple of days and weeks, no one came out of that cave. And as weeks turned into months, it's like the villagers, they couldn't really move on because they were not able to collect their loved ones' bodies or get any sort of closure. It's just this unbelievable mystery, this terrifying mystery that had ripped the entire tribe apart. And so eventually, after months and months had passed, and still no one has any idea what's happened, no one's come out of that cave, the tribal chief finally just said, we are going to basically board up the cave. We're going to cover it with rocks. Effectively, it is now a tomb, and that'll be that. No one will ever go back in. This cave will never claim another life. And so that's what they did. They used huge boulders, and they completely blocked the entrance, and that was it. Now, that was the story that the Ho-Chunk Nation passed down for generations about what happened to all those people, the warriors and the teenagers and all these people, that they were swallowed alive by this cave. And over many years, I mean, many members of this tribe, that heard the story, they didn't know what to make of it. Is it real? Is it just folklore? We don't know. But then in 1930, so hundreds of years later, a chilling discovery was made. So in 1930, there was this guy named Paul Seifert, who in Richland County, Wisconsin, he was sort of a well-known antique dealer. And something he really liked to do was he would go hiking in the forests of Richland County, the rolling hills, and he would look for indigenous artifacts that were left behind from, like the Ho-Chunk Nation and other indigenous tribes that were in the area. Sometimes he'd find, an arrowhead or something on the ground, or pottery or whatever it was. But he liked hiking, he liked being out in nature, and this was something he would look for. And, if he found something good enough, he could sell it in his antique shop. And so he's out walking the hills of Richland County, and he's well off the trail. He's sort of out in the sticks, and he finds this ravine. And he walks down the ravine, and it comes to this clearing of sorts. And he notices on the other side of the ravine, the slope that goes back up, he saw what looked to be almost like a memorial or something, like a stack of rocks that looked sort of out of place. And there was like moss and grass that's sort of grown over it. But he immediately identified that there's a mound of something here that looks a little bit out of place. And so he walks over and he begins sort of pulling off some of the rocks. And he realizes pretty quickly that this was put here on purpose, this pile of rocks, these boulders and all this was put here on purpose. And so after pulling off enough of these rocks, he realizes that there is a cave on the other side. Now, it would take quite a bit of work to pull off enough rocks that he could actually get himself inside of this cave, but eventually he did. And once he was inside of this cave, the same cave the Ho-Chunk Nation had dealt with hundreds of years earlier, he's like, wow, like this cave, it's been blocked off. I wonder what's inside of here. Maybe there are incredible indigenous artifacts inside of here. And so feeling really motivated to explore this cave, he left, went back, got some basic supplies, including a lantern, and then he came back another day, because this is well off the beaten path. No one's going to stumble upon this. And into the cave he went. And so he's in this cave, and he walks, all the way to the end where it banks to the right. He turns, and he starts walking, and the ceiling of this cave begins to come down, and it's getting really tight on him, but he's so excited to see what's in here because he knows this has been blocked off on purpose. There's something in here. And so eventually the ceiling gets so low that he's crawling with his lantern. And right as he's thinking, this is so narrow, I don't know if I can fit, he pulls himself under this one really low section and everything just opens up. It's like this grand cathedral in the middle of this cave. And he holds out his light. He kind of stands up and he holds out his light, and it's just this massive, massive space. And right away, he sees something on the ground. There are all these neat rows of human skeletons, and they're all positioned the same way. It's like they're kneeling with their hands over their head, like they're bowing, all of them. You couldn't even count how many skeletons are all positioned here, right in the middle of this cavern. And so he's looking at all of these bodies, and he's gasping, he can't believe it, and he brings the light sort of in the direction that all these bodies are aiming towards, all the bodies are praying towards. And carved into the rock is this enormous chair, like a throne. And there was nothing on the throne. And Paul, when he saw that and all these bodies and just the fact that he's deep inside of this cave, he was spooked. Even though there could have been a sea of artifacts he could have taken, he just turned and he bolted. He crawled out of there and he left the cave as fast as he could. And the reason we know about this story is because Paul, after this experience, he got in touch with a local newspaper. It's called the Milwaukee Journal. And he spoke to a journalist about what he saw. And they reported it. They reported that he found these skeletons in this throne, and it's inside of this cave that was blocked off. And there's allusions to the story of the Ho-Chunk Nation. It's like this totally cryptic story. But in 1930, and even still today, we're left with a couple of distinct questions. One, what happened to all these people? And two, who or what was sitting on that throne? Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now.
But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.
Today's podcast features 3 classic scary stories. The audio from all 3 of these stories has been pulled from our main YouTube channel and has been remastered for today's episode. The links to the original YouTube videos are in the description. The first story you'll hear is called Turn Around, and it's about why you should never explore abandoned buildings. The second story you'll hear is called The Witch, and it's about a firefighter who finds a very strange-looking cabin out in the woods. And the third and final story you'll hear is called The Woman in Black. And it's up to you if you believe this is really sleep paralysis or a paranormal haunting. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right podcast because that's all we do, and we upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to spot the Amazon Music follow button on their next set of bench press, but once they start to fatigue, just walk away. Okay, let's get into our first story called Turn Around.
From the 1950s until present, a Canadian family has owned this very isolated cabin in the middle of the Ontario backcountry. It was the only property on this very small lake. There was 2 others across the lake, but they were pretty far away. And with the exception of the side of the cabin that was facing the water, the rest of it was surrounded by really dense forest that went on for quite a while. About 2 miles away from this cabin, on the other side of this dirt road, was this huge wildlife reserve that was pretty much just a huge forest that was protected. And anytime the family was visiting this cabin, the kids would at some point go into the reserve and go explore. In 2001, when the family was at the cabin, the kids were across the road over at the reserve, and they decided to walk down this particular trail that they hadn't seen before, and they just started walking. And for about 30 minutes, they're seeing new areas they hadn't seen before, and then they come to this clearing, and there's all these abandoned houses. At first, there was a little debate about whether these were actually abandoned because they did look like they were in pretty good condition. But when they walked a little bit closer, it became very clear that nature is reclaiming this land. Grass is up to your waist. There's vines growing up the side of the houses. There were cars still parked in driveways that were totally rusted out, and, grass is growing all through them. And so they knew these were abandoned. They walked up to the first house they saw and they looked in and they couldn't believe what they were looking at. It was like whoever lived here had left without taking anything. The house was still totally furnished. In fact, their dining room tables still had plates and cups and forks and knives, like they had just had dinner and then just got up and left. They start talking about going into these houses and looking around inside, but they started wondering, is this a museum? Is that why everything is in such good repair? Should we not go inside these houses? And they start looking around for any indication that definitely this is not a museum, these are just plain abandoned. And across the street from the house they were at was this totally decrepit looking house. Let's go over there and look in there. And so they look in a window and very clearly the ceiling is totally sagging down. And the first floor is buckling completely and there's clothes and shoes scattered everywhere. And so for them, this was confirmation that this is no museum. These are abandoned. We can totally go look around inside. And so for the next couple of hours, the kids explored all the houses that looked structurally sound, that weren't going to collapse on them. And it was just fascinating. There was all this stuff that was left behind that was fairly valuable. And they didn't take anything. They just thought it was very cool. And after a while, they decided they had seen enough and they turned around and headed back to their cabin. After they got back, they told their parents about what they found. And their father was like, man, that sounds awesome. I want to go check that out. And so that day, they went right back over to the abandoned houses. The first house they showed him was the really decrepit looking one where the ceiling was sagging and there was women's shoes and clothes all over the ground to show him for sure these are abandoned, because we had some doubts at first too. These were definitely abandoned. So they look at that house and then they went back to the very first house they saw when they walked into this complex, the one that was in great condition and had the dining table still set. So they go inside and they go upstairs and they find this bedroom that, like everything else in the house, is totally intact. You got pictures on the wall, it's fully furnished. There's even still sheets made on the bed. In the pillow, it's got a head imprint from whoever was there last. And at the foot of the bed is this beautiful fur coat.
And the father walks over to it and he looks at it and he's like, this is real fur. This is a really expensive coat. I want to take this for our family. But before he took it, he had a hesitation. Is this really abandoned? You know, if someone had been here, they would have seen footprints all over the house just because there's grime all over the ground, and they can clearly see their footprints from where they've just come in. And he's like, no, this is just a weird situation. It's definitely abandoned, and finders keepers. And so he picks up the jacket and he says, I'm going to give this to mom after I clean it up. And so with the jacket in hand, the father and the kids explore the rest of the house. And when they go outside, they realize it's starting to get late and it's probably time to head back. And so they turn around and they start walking away from these houses towards their cabin. And they get about 50 or 60 meters away when one of the kids said he just had this weird sense that they were being watched. And so he turns around and he's shocked when he sees there is an old woman standing in the bedroom that they had just been in, where the fur coat was. She's got a loose bun on the top of her head. She's got this blue shawl on her shoulders over a cream blouse, and she's glaring at them. When the father saw this woman, he made an audible gasp, and the rest of the group turned around too and saw this woman in the window. And the feeling was guilt. They're like, oh my goodness, we just stole from this poor woman who lives in this abandoned house. And so right away, the whole group starts walking right back towards the house. They're going to give this jacket back. In fact, the dad is like, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have taken this. I'm sorry. And as they're walking back towards the property, the woman in the window who hasn't said anything just turns around and walks back into the main part of the house. They can't see her anymore. And so as they're walking closer to the house, they're assuming she's going to come downstairs to retrieve this jacket that they've taken from her. And so they get right up to the front door, and the father is yelling to her, I'm sorry, where do you want me to leave this jacket? I can bring it in to you. And they're kind of just waiting for her to come downstairs, and she doesn't. She's nowhere to be found. She's not making any sound. She's not indicating what to do. And so after waiting for a couple of minutes, the kids don't really know what to do, and they're kind of getting uneasy about the situation. And the father is still very confident that he just wants to give this back and make amends, make peace with her, say he's sorry. And so he walks inside. He tells his kids, stay here, I'm going to go give it to her. And he goes inside and he disappears upstairs. And then all of a sudden, from across the street in that decrepit house with the caved-in ceiling, they hear one of the second floor windows come slamming down. And at the same time, their dad comes charging down the stairs, no jacket with him, and he's saying, go, go, go. And the kids are spooked from the window getting slammed, and they start running away until they're about 100 meters away from these houses. And they stop, and they're panting, and they're out of breath. And the kids ask their dad, what happened? And he says to them, I looked everywhere upstairs and I could not find that lady. I don't know where she is. Either she's hiding from us or something, but I happened to be looking out at that other house. Something caught my eye. There was movement, and I saw another person in the second floor of that building that's falling apart. And I watched them slam the window. And then as soon as I did, I heard someone yell, get out. And I ran out after you guys. Now, the kids and the dad are absolutely terrified, and they want to leave, but they also want one more look at these buildings before they do. And when they had run away, they had stopped behind this big group of trees that obscured their view to the buildings. They were out of sight. And so they begin to peek their heads around the tree until they can see the building, and they can't believe what they see. Standing in the window of the fur coat room is not only the old woman, but also a very tall man who's holding her shoulders and is bending down because his head is too high to look standing. He's crouched down and he's looking out the window next to her, and they're both glaring towards them. The father and his kids are practically falling over themselves to sprint away and back to their cabin. To this day, that family has no idea who those people were, what they were doing there, how they were able to move around without making any noise and consistently hide from them and not leave any footprints. It was all very strange and terrifying stuff. And then the government ended up demolishing those houses almost immediately after they were there. And so they'll never get any answers because everything's gone. Our next story is called The Witch.
In 2004, wildland firefighters were called into a forest in central Idaho to combat an emerging fire. By the time the crew arrived at this forest, it was clear this fire was spreading a lot faster than they anticipated. As a result, Mike, who was the assistant superintendent, basically the second in command of this particular crew, he said he was going to hop on the ATV and drive off way ahead of them to see if they needed to spread out farther to stop this fire. So Mike hops on an ATV and he takes off down this ancient-looking logging road that probably hasn't seen a vehicle or a person in decades.
Mike had made it about a half mile down this trail when he noticed out of the corner of his eye a bobcat was running perpendicular to him straight out of the forest as if it was going to cross the road about 100 feet in front of him. Mike comes to a stop and thinks this bobcat doesn't know I'm here. It probably is not used to seeing people. It's going to come out into this trail, see me, get spooked, and run away. But instead, this bobcat runs directly into the middle of the road, turns, and faces Mike in a very aggressive posture. Mike is shocked at what he's seeing because he knows bobcats are notoriously elusive and they're nocturnal. So for this thing to be out in the daytime and to be intentionally blocking his path and standing there aggressively like it's going to attack him was so out of the ordinary. So the two of them are just looking at each other, not moving for about 10 seconds until this bobcat opens its mouth and then begins screaming like a person. It did not seem like the right sound for what he was looking at. He said more than scary, it was just intensely weird. And just as quickly as this bobcat has arrived, it stops screaming, turns and runs to a tree, sprints up the tree and climbs onto this branch that happens to be perched right over the trail he's on. And Mike's looking up at this bobcat that's right over this trail, and he knows if I'm going to continue going down this trail, I have to go under this screaming bobcat. Although totally freaked out, he knew he needed to keep going down this trail, and he's thinking to himself, you know what, this bobcat is probably just scared of me, and that was its reaction, as bizarre as it was. And so he throws his ATV in gear and he starts slowly moving down the trail, the whole time keeping his eye on the bobcat, making sure it doesn't show any sign like it's going to leap off onto him. And as he got closer and closer, he just gunned it and sped underneath the branch, and luckily it didn't jump down on him. And as he got a little bit farther away, he turned up to look, and the bobcat had turned around and was still watching him very intently sitting on this branch. Mike makes it about another half mile down the road before he sees something else that's very strange. He sees a cabin. It's this little tiny cabin that's tucked away in the woods, and he's thinking to himself, I'm on federal land. There aren't supposed to be any private structures here. And he figures, even if this is illegal, I do need to stop and make sure no one's in there because there's this huge fire coming this way. And so he parks his ATV and he starts walking off the trail towards this cabin. And as he gets closer, he can tell it's not only a very old cabin, but it's almost certainly abandoned because he can see all these slats that have been put over all of the windows, like it's been boarded up. But when he got up close, he noticed something strange. The door itself into this cabin was not boarded up, and the doorknob was missing, and in its place was this shiny silver chain link that was thread through the opening where there should have been a doorknob around a wooden post that was right outside the door, basically a makeshift lock because there was no doorknob to it. And he's thinking how weird it is that in the middle of this forest, on an old ancient logging road that clearly no one goes down, where bobcats are running around freely, that there would be this new chain here, which indicates someone must have been here recently. And so he bends down to look through the space that was still there from where the doorknob should have been, and he looks inside, and he can't really see anything. And so he takes his flashlight and he shines it in, and he can't believe what he's looking at. There's all this furniture inside this tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere, and it's all upside down. And he's just totally creeped out. So he puts his flashlight away and kind of backs up, and he starts walking back towards the road, and he can't help it, but the whole time he's looking over his shoulder back at the cabin, like someone's going to emerge from outside of this cabin. He gets to the road, and by the time he's there, he's running. He jumps on his ATV, he whips it around, and he starts blazing back up the logging road back towards his crew. And when he turns the corner to where that bobcat was, he sees there is now a Native American woman standing in the middle of the path. She's wearing this tattered white nightgown, she's barefoot, and she's standing in the same spot he saw that bobcat. And she's looking at him as if she's expecting him, like she's been tipped off that he's going to be here. And he stops about 100 feet away from her, and now he's officially freaked out. He's still looking over his shoulder towards that cabin because now everything is just totally weird to him. And before he has a chance to do anything, this woman lets out a scream, a blood-curdling scream that is identical to the bobcat's scream. And so Mike is totally unnerved by this. Everything about this day has really gone sideways as this woman is screaming at the top of her lungs, and then suddenly she stops. Mike's still just standing there like, what's going on? And she runs to the same tree the bobcat had climbed earlier, and she climbs up this tree and gets onto the branch where the bobcat was and perches like an animal on the branch looking at Mike. And now, just like the bobcat, Mike is going to have to drive right underneath this woman who is perched over the trail. And so he throws his ATV in gear and he starts driving and he's staring at this woman, and now her mouth is just open like she's about to scream again. And as soon as he got close, he gunned it and went right underneath her. And he turned around after he got some distance away from her, and she's still on the branch, now turned around facing him as he drives away. He goes back, he tells the crew what he saw, and as much as they all want to go back and see this woman and see this cabin, they know they can't. They got to fight this fire. And so ultimately they do that and then they leave. A couple of days later, Mike was in a bar in the town right near the forest they had just been in fighting that fire, and Mike had seen the woman in the cabin, and he struck up a conversation with a local. And he said, "Hey, do you know of any buildings that are in that section of the forest?" And the guy kind of laughed and he was like, the only building I ever heard of out there was apparently some cabin where some crazy lady thought of herself as a witch, and she apparently had a bobcat for a pet. And so we as kids were just told to stay away from there. So besides that, I don't know. The next and final story of today's episode is called The Woman in Black. In October of 2005, a 21-year-old named Nathan was back home in Elk Grove, California, visiting his mother at her apartment for a couple of days. Her apartment was part of this really safe complex. It was gated. There's lots of lights and cameras. So anything that went bump in the night was just going to be, your noisy neighbors or something. On the last night of Nathan's stay, he was laying in his bed in the guest room, listening to the hum of the street lamp that was outside and the crickets and the passing by of cars when he drifted off to sleep. At about 2 a.m., Nathan woke up, or so he thought. He couldn't move his body, he could only move his eyes, and even though he had never experienced sleep paralysis before, he instinctively understood this is probably that. He noticed the room was completely silent. There was no more crickets, no more hum of the light outside, no more traffic, just total silence. And then he started flashing his eyes around the room because he couldn't move his head or his body, and he started taking stock of the room. The bed he was in was positioned as far away from the door as he could in the back right corner. From where he was laying, if he looked to his right, in that corner was this big armoire, and then moving left from the armoire as he scanned the room, you'd come to the door, which is on the opposite side of where his bed was, and then if he kept scanning left, he would reach the foot of his bed, and just beyond the foot of his bed was a table and a chair. But because he was laying flat, he couldn't really look down and actually see the table and chair. And so with all of his strength, he managed to raise his head just enough that he had a line of sight to that section of his room, the only section he has not looked at yet. And he sees the table and chair, and he sees in the corner is this dark figure that's standing there looking at him. He's completely frozen with fear. His thought is, there's an intruder in the house. How did they get in here? What are they doing in here? And he managed to keep his head up just long enough to get a decent look at this dark figure, and he determined it was most likely a woman with a shawl covering her face. And before his head fell back to the pillow, he saw her suddenly crouch down on the ground out of view. And then Nathan's head fell back. And now he knows there's just some stranger in his room, and he can't lift his head up anymore, and he's looking around with his eyes. He sees the armoire, he sees the door, he can't see that table and chair, and then he hears the sound of someone slithering along the ground out of view, and he can hear her breathing as she's getting closer and closer to the edge of the bed. And he's laying there terrified. He's so scared he can't even make a sound. And he's telling himself, this has to be a dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up. And he's laying there, and this woman, she stands up and she leans out over his bed and she looks at him, and her face is pale and her eyes are sunk way back in her head. Then she begins to slowly crawl on top of him, and Nathan's sitting here looking at this woman. He wants to close his eyes, but he can't. Then he just feels his chest being pressed down. He can hear the sounds of the springs compressing all around him as this woman positions herself on his chest. And then he finally manages to let out a scream, and then suddenly he's awake. The woman's gone. And he sits up and he's looking around. There's nobody in his room. The familiar hum of the light and the crickets and the traffic outside, they all return. And his mom comes running in the room and she's like, "Hey, are you okay? I heard screaming in here." He said, "Oh, no, I had a bad dream. I'm fine now. I had a terrible dream, but I'm fine now." And his mom's like, "Okay, all right, you need anything?" And he's like, "Nope." So she comes over, she gives him a hug and a kiss. She goes back to bed, and he would go downstairs, flip on a Disney movie, actually Aladdin, and he would fall asleep with a Disney movie on and with lights on. And there was no more sleep paralysis that night. The next day, Nathan got up and he headed back to his house, and he couldn't shake the experience. He had never had sleep paralysis before, but it was just so much more terrifying than he ever would have imagined. And he's just thinking to himself, I can't believe there are people that put up with this on any sort of regular basis. But, after a couple of days and getting home and not experiencing any sleep paralysis, time went on and he just kind of forgot about it. A few months later, in March of 2006, Nathan is at this big family party in Chico, California, big outdoor barbecue, all of his family's there, and at some point his sister shows up. His sister was not supposed to be attending this party, so it was a great surprise. He hasn't seen her in a while, and he immediately pulls her aside to catch up with her. And so for the first hour of their conversation, they're just chatting about their lives and what they're up to. Towards the end of their conversation, Nathan suddenly felt compelled to share his sleep paralysis experience with his sister. And the reason he wanted to was because he knew that she knew that he was actually a skeptic. And so she would believe him. If he's telling her this is what happened, she would believe that that's what he saw. And so he starts by saying, I had the weirdest experience at Mom's apartment just a couple of months ago. I'm pretty sure it was sleep paralysis. And his sister immediately butts in and she goes, wait a minute. I had sleep paralysis for the first time in my life 2 weeks ago at Mom's apartment. It was horrible. I was in the guest room and then I saw this woman and she was like standing on me. I thought I was going to die. It was horrible. That's exactly what happened to me. I was laying in the guest room and I couldn't move. And then I saw a woman in the corner and she stood on my chest. They proceeded to go over all the details of each of their stories and they discovered that they had had almost the exact same experience. And at the end of it, they wanted to have a rational explanation for how they both could just somehow have their only sleep paralysis experience in the same room in roughly the same timeline and experience the exact same events. They were trying to, come up with a rational explanation for that, but it was just too much of a coincidence. But ultimately, neither of them were really prepared to start discussing what else it could be. So they decided to just kind of laugh it off and say, man, that's pretty weird, and they moved on. After the party was over, Nathan would go back to his house and he would tell his wife about this crazy coincidence he and his sister had, and his wife would say, yeah, that's wild. But after that, Nathan just did not want to think about it or talk about it, and so he kind of just, pushed it out of his mental space and did forget about it. He moved on. 5 months later, in August of 2006, Nathan's mom would move out of that apartment building and she would move into a 2-story house still in Elk Grove, California. Shortly after she moved in, she asked Nathan if he would come spend a couple nights with her, and Nathan said sure. In order to better understand what happens to Nathan over the course of his stay at his mother's new house, you need to understand a basic layout of her house. So when you walk through her double doors, to your left is going to be a formal living room. In the center of the house is a hallway that shoots straight back to the kitchen. And then to your right when you walk in, there's a wall, and on that wall is the stairs leading up to the second floor. If you take those stairs to the second floor, you reach a landing where there's a window that looks back into the backyard, and immediately to your right, there is a single door, and that's the master bedroom where Nathan's mom would sleep. From the landing, if you turned left, there'd be another door that's a mirror image of the master bedroom door, and this door is the guest room. That's where Nathan was going to stay. And then to the left of the guest room was a hall that went to the front of the house, but that's irrelevant to the story. If you went inside the guest room, the bed was located in the back right corner. So the same layout as the guest room in the apartment building, where the person laying in the bed, so Nathan, his feet would be closest to the door. And from Nathan's perspective in the bed, the only other piece of furniture in this new house guest room was a table that was, from his perspective, on the right-hand wall, centered on the wall. And on the table was a TV. So that's the only things in the room. The first night Nathan was at this new house was totally uneventful. The second night, not so much. He was up in the guest room, laying on the bed, watching TV. The lights are off, it's just the TV on. And at some point, he dozes off. He wakes up a short time later and he can't move. It's the same sensation he had when he was staying with his mom at her apartment. And he begins to panic because the last time he felt this way, a strange veiled woman stood on his chest and made it feel like he was dying. And so immediately he's trying to move his body. He can't. And so using his eyes, he starts looking around the room, praying this woman is not in the room with him. And so he looks to the right, to that corner, which he can see. There's no one there. From this corner, he starts scanning across the room. He sees the TV, it's still on. He keeps scanning and he sees the door and it's open. And then he scans and he's able to just barely make out the space at the foot of the bed. He can actually see to the corner, and this woman, she's not in here. And so initially he feels incredibly relieved that she's not in the room with him. But then he finds himself focusing on the open door into the dark hallway. And he's thinking to himself, please do not come walking through that door. And so he stares at the open door, just hoping he breaks out of the sleep paralysis, when he notices something about the TV. It's flickering. And so he averts his gaze to the TV and he realizes what he's looking at on TV does not look familiar. It does not look like a TV show. It looks like CCTV camera footage. Like it looks like a security camera footage. and he realizes the footage he's looking at is the inside of his mother's kitchen downstairs. He recognized the way it was laid out. That's his mother's house. That's downstairs. And he's staring at the footage thinking, why is this footage playing on the TV? And I don't think there's a camera down there. When he notices on the camera, the woman with the veil walks into the middle of the frame. And she looks up at the camera right as the camera turns off. And then the room is completely dark. There's no more ambient light in the room. The hallway is dark. And he's left paralyzed knowing this woman is downstairs in the kitchen. And as he's laying there, he hears her start running through the house. And it sounds like an animal is barreling into things as she's running through the bottom floor. And she stops at the foot of the stairs. And he's thinking to himself, I know where she's going. She's coming up to my room. And so as he's laying there, he feels his heart racing and he's staring at the open door. He knows she's going to come flying up those stairs and she's going to come through that door. And instead of running up the stairs, he hears her take 1 step, 2 step. And as she's making her way up the stairs, he's just thinking, please break out of this trance. Stop this paralysis. Wake up, wake up. And then he sees her head emerge and she turns to look at him from the stairs into the room. And once she sees it's him, she bolts around and starts charging into the room on all fours like an animal. At this point, Nathan lets out a primal scream. He is scared for his life as this woman is charging towards him and she stops dead in her tracks right in the middle of the room. She looks at him, turns around, and crashes out of the room, charges downstairs, and then it's silent. As soon as she was downstairs, Nathan could sit up, except it did not feel like the first time he had sleep paralysis at his mom's apartment when he sat up and he had the sensation of relief. You've woken up. You were asleep before. Now you're awake. This time, it was like he was always awake, but now he can sit up. He did not have a sense of relief. In fact, he was worried she was still in the house. And as he's sitting up in bed, his mother comes running into the room. She looks disheveled. She's half asleep. And she's like, was that you? Were you running around the house? I could have sworn I heard someone running around the house. Was that you? Nathan's looking at her and he can't even process what he's been through, whether that was real, whether it was a dream. And he's trying to find the words to describe to his mom the dream he had. Like he can't process what's happening. And he just says, Mom, we have to check the house. We have to make sure no one's in the house. And so the two of them flip on every light upstairs. They're not even talking. At this point, it's survival mode. They turn on all the lights upstairs and Nathan leads the way down. They're flicking on all the lights and they manage to search the whole house and there's no sign of a break-in. There's no one in their house. After the coast was clear and they felt like they were not in immediate danger, they went into the kitchen to kind of talk about what just happened. And so Nathan's like, okay, Mom, I just got to tell you everything that I'm thinking right now. I can't really process what just happened. I think it was a bad dream, but I'm starting to think that it could be something else, or I'm just losing my mind. So a few months ago, I was sleeping in your guest room in your apartment, and I had an experience that I'm almost positive was sleep paralysis. You know, I was laying there, I couldn't move, and this figure was in the room, and they were standing on me. It was terrifying, but it sounded an awful lot like sleep paralysis. But then a couple months after that, I talked to my sister, and I told her about it, and she told me that very recently, right before you moved into this house actually, she was in that room, and she also had basically the exact same experience. She had never had sleep paralysis before. I had never had sleep paralysis before. So we've basically had the exact same horrifying experience in the same room around the same time. And then just now, tonight, I had another sleep paralysis experience with the same woman who was running around the house, and you just said you heard her running around the house. His mom looked really concerned, but she wasn't shocked. She says to Nathan, I have seen this woman. I saw her in my apartment way long time ago, but I remember what you're describing. That's the experience I had. This woman, showed up in the room and she stood on me. And it scared the heck out of me, but I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was sleep paralysis. And so Nathan and his mom proceeded to spend the next several hours just talking through what this could be. How could they, all three of them, him, his mom, and his sister, how could all of them have had the exact same experience? And how could tonight, when Nathan had this experience, how could his mom have heard those footsteps if that was indeed sleep paralysis? Because it wasn't Nathan, he was in the bedroom. And it wasn't his mom, she was in her bedroom. And she didn't have any pets, so who could it be? Nathan says he and his family are still totally rattled by this experience, and they don't have an answer. And this is a family of skeptics, so they're not looking for a reason to call this paranormal. They simply don't have the answers. Nathan has said that he, his mom, and his sister have not had any further experiences with the woman in black ever since that last experience Nathan had, and they're just hoping it stays that way. Thank you for listening to the MrBallen podcast. If you enjoyed today's stories, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, which is just called MrBallen, where we have hundreds more stories just like this one, but many of them are not available on this podcast. They're only on YouTube. Again, the YouTube channel is just called MrBallen. So that's going to do it. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, see ya.
All right, so I am back in front of a literal fire because you guys loved the last fire episode that we did, the last campfire episode. And on today's campfire episode, I have a great ghost story. Not only is the story itself super creepy, but I'm telling you, the plot twist at the very end, worth sticking around for. You've got to listen. It's a great story. I know you're going to love it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right fire pit because that's all we do. And we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the follow button to join you at a nice, cozy campfire. But as soon as they sit down and they get their s'mores all ready to go, pull out a fire extinguisher and put out the fire. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. One afternoon in the winter of 2015, a 57-year-old woman named Patricia Dare was sleeping on her couch inside of her home in France when the sound of her phone dinging woke her up. Patricia slowly opened her eyes and she felt groggy and confused. She'd been relaxing and watching a movie since she had the day off from her job as a reporter for a local radio station, but she realized, she must have dozed off. And so Patricia, she grabbed her phone and she checked her notifications and she saw she had a text message, but from a number that she didn't recognize. And what it said was really weird. It said, quote, "The castle wants you. The castle is calling you. Come." And for a second, Patricia just had no idea what this meant. Couldn't make sense of what this even said. But then she realized there was actually text messages that she had received earlier from this number, and she realized who it was. So the person texting Patricia this strange message was this middle-aged woman named Beranger. About 8 months earlier, Beranger had approached Patricia while she was out in public and told her that she desperately needed Patricia's help. Because, Beranger said, she worked in a castle, and that castle was haunted. So Patricia, in addition to being a local news reporter, was also a self-proclaimed psychic medium, meaning she basically believed that she had the ability to contact the dead. That was something she was really passionate about. And in fact, she was fairly famous for being a psychic medium in France. So, this request was actually not that bizarre for Patricia. But because of Patricia's status, both because she was, a famous medium and also because she was on the news, she was sort of well known, and it drew a lot of people to her, claiming that they had, paranormal issues, ranging from, thinking they saw a ghost to their house is haunted or whatever. And almost all the time, when Patricia would follow up with some people who claimed they had issues, she would discover that, despite her best efforts, there clearly was nothing going on that was paranormal. There was no dead to talk to. It was just like, drafty windows or a house settling or, just a shadow that looked really eerie or something. So the vast majority of times people approached Patricia, she really didn't take them that seriously. So a couple of months ago, when Beranger had approached Patricia, her reaction to it was basically like, "Oh, your castle's haunted." Yeah, I bet, but she was polite about it, but realistically, she didn't believe it was true. But because Beranger was sort of persistent, really demanding help from Patricia did give her her phone number sort of to be polite. And then immediately afterwards, Beranger had texted Patricia And those were the text messages that Patricia had, in the thread, but Patricia had intentionally ignored them. But now, here was Beranger texting her once again with this sort of weird cryptic message, again about this haunting of her castle. And this actually kind of piqued Patricia's interest. And because Patricia did have a day off here, she actually felt inspired to follow up and maybe go check out this castle and see what this haunting was all about. An hour and a half later, Patricia pulled up in front of this small cottage that was on the same property as the castle. She knew from earlier text messages that this cottage was where Beranger actually lived. And so Patricia parked, she got out, she walked up to the front door of the cottage, and she knocked. But nobody answered. And so after a few moments, she tried knocking again, this time a little bit louder, and then the door did open. But it was not Beranger. It was this man, this middle-aged man who looked very confused to be seeing Patricia standing there. And just from the look on his face, Patricia immediately launched into this, explanation of why she was here. Oh, is Beranger here? I was speaking to her via text message. And the man still, he's looking at her like, what are you doing here? What's going on? But then from behind him, out walks Beranger. And when she looked towards the door and she saw Patricia standing there, Beranger was practically weeping. I mean, she was so happy and clearly relieved to see Patricia, and she's just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming. This is unbelievable. Thank you. Like, we really need your help. And then before Patricia could ask any questions, Beranger pointed to the man that had opened the door for Patricia and seemed so confused. And, at this point, his expression had softened quite a bit. And Beranger said, this is my husband. This is Remy. And he, too, is so relieved you're here. And so at this point, Patricia, she shook his hand and she smiled at them both and was like, yeah, I don't know what I can do for you. Why don't you fill me in? All I know is apparently your castle over there is haunted. Can you tell me the story? And so Beranger, she had to kind of compose herself because she was quite emotional just to see Patricia here. But, after collecting herself, she told Patricia that about a year ago, her husband, Remy, had been hired as the caretaker of that castle and that she had just come along to help. And she said, at first, both of them had been really excited for this opportunity because it came with free housing in this cottage. However, Beranger said that they had only been working here for a couple of weeks when really weird stuff started to happen. Beranger said that she'd be in the castle doing, daily chores, and she would know that she's the only one in the castle. Yet she would suddenly hear what were obvious footsteps of people walking and running around on the upper floors of the castle. And at this point, Remy chimed in and he said, yeah, me too. Like, I've heard those footsteps in the castle and I know it's totally empty. But even stranger than that is Remy said he'd be in the castle and he would hear voices. And not just, people whispering or something like you see in the movies. No, he would hear people screaming at the top of their lungs, like in other distant parts of the castle that he couldn't see. And it was terrifying. As Patricia listened to Remy and Beranger tell the story, Patricia was struck by how earnestly they came across. I mean, they definitely were shaken by whatever they experienced inside of that castle. Like, they were genuinely troubled and didn't know what to do about it. I mean, Remy still had this job at the castle. They still had to go in there, but it was becoming like this big issue and they didn't know what to do about it. As Patricia was listening to the couple tell the story, she couldn't help but feel like they were being very honest. They seemed very earnest as they're telling the story. Like, they weren't trying to dramatize. They were trying to relay what amounted to, trauma. They both clearly did not like going in the castle. It was like this thing they had to do due to Remy's job, but they were trapped. They felt like, we don't know what to do here and no one's taking us seriously. But at the same time, Patricia is a veteran, psychic medium, and she's been to numerous house calls, numerous haunted homes, and, many times, the screams people think they hear in their home are like, the sound of wind coming in through an open window, and the footsteps are like, a pet somewhere in the house. So there could easily be, a reasonable justification here, but it seemed apparent that there was enough here that it certainly warranted Patricia actually going to the castle and having a look around. And so she said, okay, let's go over. Let's go see the castle. A few minutes later, Patricia followed Beranger and Remy along this wooded path from the cottage over to the castle. Even from pretty far away, the castle was huge and very intimidating. There were two very tall, round towers on either end, and in the middle was a slightly shorter section that was decorated with a bunch of turrets. The castle only had two windows that were visible from the front where they were approaching. And for a second, as Patricia was looking at it, she had this sort of uneasy feeling that the windows were the eyes on the castle and the castle was looking at her. But she shook the feeling off and kept walking along. And a few minutes later, they reached the castle's huge front door. And at this point, Remy pulled out this huge key ring covered in keys, and he unlocked the door, and then he kind of stepped aside and pushed it open, sort of gesturing for Patricia to make her way inside. Now, Patricia was doing her best to be very professional and, not quite buy into the hype, at least not yet. This could be something completely rational, but when Patricia walked into the castle, she found herself inside of this huge empty space called the Great Hall. And the first thing she noticed was really how dark and cold it was inside. I mean, this was a castle, of course, and so that was sort of the atmosphere you'd expect, but this felt like eerie. Like this was not a place you'd want to spend a lot of time. And also it just felt like the atmosphere was just heavy somehow. Like it really was just a tense place to be. Patricia took a deep breath and kind of centered herself. And then she looked around a bit more closely and she saw there were a few windows on the back wall, but they were all shut. And then right in front of her was this huge stone staircase. And to her right and to her left, she could see there were long hallways that she knew must lead to dozens of rooms potentially. And so after standing there for a few moments, just kind of taking in the scene, Patricia turned to Béranger and she asked her, she said, okay, so you've heard footsteps, upstairs when this place was empty. Can you tell me what you were doing, in any of the instances where those sounds came through? Like, what were you doing? Do you remember? And Béranger said, actually, yeah, I do remember. The last time it happened, I was closing the shutters on the window. And I know I heard people upstairs when I was doing that. And so immediately Patricia's thinking, oh, that could be it. Maybe it was literally the sound the shutters were making that maybe somehow gave Béranger the impression that there were footsteps elsewhere inside of this castle. I mean, everything echoes inside of here. It's this big cavernous space. It was possible. And so Patricia's like, okay, well, let's go test the shutters. Let's just see if maybe that is causing some strange sounds in your home. And Béranger and Remy did not seem remotely offended by this. If anything, they were eager to find a rational explanation for whatever it was they were experiencing. And so quickly, they, along with Patricia, walked over to one of the windows, and Patricia reached out and she opened up the shutters and then shut the shutters and then did it a few more times. But there were no strange sounds. There certainly were no sounds of footsteps running around inside of the castle. There was no way that the shutters were making sounds that you could confuse for footsteps. This was not it. However, Patricia decided she would, just in case, try another shutter. See if maybe one of the other shutters made strange sounds, just to confirm really this is not the case. But as she reached for this other shutter, before she even touched it, there was this loud, sudden, high-pitched shrieking sound that echoed all through the castle from upstairs, and then it just went deadly silent. And immediately the hairs on the back of Patricia's neck stood up. I mean, this was like an unmistakable sound. And Patricia, she turns to Remy and Béranger, and they're obviously spooked. I mean, they've experienced stuff like this, but this is still just so terrifying. And Patricia, she's standing there not even sure what to do, but then she tells herself, wait a minute. That couldn't have been what we thought it was. There's no way that was some screech coming from some ghost upstairs. There has to be a logical explanation here. And part of the reason she was thinking this is even in, her time as a psychic medium, nothing this visceral had ever happened in her career. Something like that was out of a movie, literally a ghost screeching upstairs. And so Patricia turns to the couple and she's like, look, obviously I heard that too, but let's not rule out that could have been the wind or something. Let's not jump to conclusions here, okay? Let's be rational, let's be pragmatic, let's just search the castle and see what we're up against. And so the couple, Remy and Béranger, they did not seem reassured, but they kind of nodded along whatever you say. But then, before anyone could do anything else, there was another sudden, loud, high-pitched scream coming from somewhere else upstairs. A different voice is now screaming upstairs. And then it went deadly silent again, and then it was very clear to Patricia, and certainly to the couple, that this castle might just be haunted. There's something going on here that is not right. However, as Patricia is standing there kind of trying to get her bearings of what she should even suggest they do, because suddenly she is the expert in charge of the response here, before she could even think,
she had this very powerful feeling come over her that she would sort of describe as like a pull. It was like a magnet was pulling her in the direction of these screams. Like she felt like she needed to go upstairs to the second floor to wherever those screams came from. She had to. And it wasn't even clear if this was like her channeling her psychic medium powers. It was like the castle was pulling her deeper and deeper inside of the structure. And so without even telling Remy and Béranger what she was doing, Patricia just kind of silently turned and began walking almost against her will towards that stone staircase that went up to the upper levels. And now at this point, the castle is deadly silent. All you can hear is the sound of their footsteps as they're making their way over towards the staircase. And, Remy and Béranger, they're so frightened. They're just, tucked up right behind Patricia, following her along, not even sure what they should be doing. And so upstairs they went, and Patricia, again, she's got like this intense feeling that she has to go upstairs. She can't even control it. And so up the stairs she goes. No one's talking. All they hear is the sound of the footsteps on the staircase. And up they go, all the way up to the third floor, which is, where these screams were likely coming from. And at that point, Patricia, almost on instinct, turned left and began walking down this long hallway with all these doors that were shut along the way. And again, the castle is just deadly quiet. All you can hear are their footsteps. And down the hallway they go, all the way to a dead end where there is a single room that is shut at the very end of the hallway. And at this point, Patricia, almost like without even thinking, she turns and kind of almost aggressively says to Remy, "Get your keys out and open this door." Like she didn't even know why she was being aggressive. It was like just coming through her. But Béranger at this point, she chimes in and says, the owner of the castle, they told us this is the one room we're not allowed to go in. We've never been inside of here. We can't go in here. But Patricia, she just looks at Béranger and says, "I don't care. We have to go in. Open the door. I'm going in. I have to go in this room." And so at this point, Béranger, she looks at her husband, and Remy kind of shrugged. I mean, they didn't even know what they're supposed to do at this point, but they figured, all right, she's the expert. Let's let her go in. And so Remy, he pulled out his big set of keys and he fumbled through them all. And Patricia, she's rearing to go in this room. She can't even understand why she feels this way. And Remy, he reaches over, he turns the lock, he pushes the door open, and Patricia walks inside. Now, as soon as this door opened up, Remy and Béranger got a look inside of this room. And it was unremarkable. It was like a vacant room. There was nothing inside of it. Like there was no clear reason why this room was off limits per the owner. But as they watched Patricia walk to the middle of the room, sort of slowly and methodically, and come to a stop right in the middle with her back to them, they could have sworn they heard whispers suddenly picking up inside of this room, even though there's nobody else in there but Patricia. And then Patricia, who by this point was sort of, freaking out Béranger and Remy, she was acting just very different than when she had first arrived. She just stood there in this sort of bizarre way, just like rigid, staring towards the back of this room as these whispers are kind of going on in this dark room. And then from the threshold, Béranger and Remy watched as Patricia, who has not turned around yet or anything, she just began to twitch, like her shoulders were moving around funny and her neck was snapping in a strange direction. And then she began letting out this just awful croaking sound, this constant like single tone croaking sound. And it went on for so long that you'd think she would have need to take in a breath to then continue this croaking sound, but she didn't. It just went on and on and on, just emanating from her body. And Remy and Béranger, they're terrified at this point for a host of reasons, but really it's now Patricia that's scaring them the most. And Patricia, as she's twitching and croaking, she suddenly stops and whips around and looks at the couple, and her mouth is open, like her jaw is slack, and this croaking sound is still coming out of her, but clearly she's also weeping. Tears are coming down her face. Now, Remy and Béranger, they are beyond terrified at this point for so many reasons, but they clearly know some kind of crisis is unfolding with Patricia, and they want to help her, and they were about to ask her, like, what can we do? Like, what's going on? When there's this loud slamming sound somewhere else in the castle on one of the lower levels. It sounded like a door slamming shut, but really loud. And it was like the noise like snapped Patricia out of whatever trance she was in, and suddenly she became really focused. And then instead of communicating with the couple, she just bolted right past them, sprinted down the hallway, and ran down the stairs, like she was chasing after the sound that had just been made somewhere downstairs. And so Remy and Béranger, they're like, what else can we do but follow her? And so they run down the hallway, several, lengths behind Patricia, who's somewhere downstairs. And they get down to the second floor, the couple does, and they can hear the sound of movement in one of the rooms down the hallway. And then they hear this loud, like animalistic yelling sound that appears to be, Patricia yelling or growling or something somewhere in one of these rooms. And so they make their way in that direction, and they see there's this open door that leads into a bedroom, and then there's a bathroom off the bedroom. They go in and they look in that bathroom, and there's Patricia, and her back is to them, and she's on her knees, and she's visibly weeping, and she's looking up at something in the room. She was kind of at an angle where they could see her face, and her face is contorted just in horror, and she's seeing something in the bathroom that is just completely terrifying her, but there's nothing in the bathroom. And so Remy and Beranger, they walk in there and they grab Patricia, who did not want to leave, but they drag her out of the bathroom, they stand her up, and they literally forcibly remove her from the castle. Several hours later, Beranger and Remy were back inside of their cottage, sitting in their living room with all these papers scattered in front of them on their coffee table. And next to them was Patricia, who by this point, she was basically back to normal, but she was still very shaken up by what happened in the castle. And also by this point, she was able to explain to the couple what had happened, from her perspective in the castle. She basically told them that she did basically, go into a trance. She had a psychic medium experience, but she had never had anything like this before. I mean, this was visceral. This was way beyond anything she had ever experienced in her entire career. According to Patricia, when she had walked into that locked room on the third floor of the castle, the forbidden room, the room was not empty. When she went in there, she had that calling to go in there. And as soon as the door opened, what she saw was a room filled with people, with basically entities, ghosts, if you will. Beranger and Remy couldn't see them, but Patricia could. And she said all these entities were wearing different clothes, like from different time periods. There were people in medieval peasant outfits, and there were people wearing Victorian dresses, and there were people wearing, very modern 20th century business suits. But that really wasn't the initial impression that Patricia got. That was just something she noticed. What she immediately picked up on when she was called into that room and saw these entities is how lost and sort of scared these ghosts seemed, like they were in trouble. And Patricia, she said, she felt like she was pulled into the center of the room and then felt kind of anchored there. And as she stood there, these ghosts basically began crowding in on her, like they were trying to get her help by getting closer to her. But she felt like overcome with this almost claustrophobic feeling of being suffocated by their sadness, not even by their physical presence. It was like their loneliness and desperation was like washing over her. And it was so awful, it made her weep. And then eventually, Patricia said she was able to kind of force her body to whip around and look at least in the direction of the exit, because she wanted to leave at this point. And it was at that point that, she's making this groaning sound, which she didn't even recall. And she hears this loud slamming sound, which was the door slamming downstairs. And that kind of spooked the entities away from her, and she was able to bolt from the room. And Patricia said when she got out into the hallway and basically began maneuvering in the direction of the slammed door, because again, she had this intense sense of being pulled in the direction of this noise, she said it felt very different than when she had been pulled up to the third floor. She said now, in retrospect, when she had been pulled up there, what she was being pulled by didn't seem malevolent. It seemed, neutral or maybe even positive. But as soon as she was going in the direction of this slammed door down on the second floor, she said it felt totally different. There was obviously like a dark presence, like something bad was pulling her towards them. But still, almost against her will, she ran down the hallway, she went down the stairs, and she made her way into that bedroom, with Beranger and Remy following closely behind. And Patricia said she eventually turned and went into this bathroom in this bedroom. And when she went in there, she saw something that was so terrifying, she just fell to her knees and began to scream. That was that like animalistic wailing sound that the couple heard. What she saw was this enormous, tall, just like dark figure. It was a ghost of this tall man of sorts with like these deep scars all over his face. And he was wearing this rusted chainmail armor, like he was from a different time. And he just seemed evil, like a dark, dark presence. And she knew that was the feeling she was getting. It was coming from this ghost. And it was only because Remy and Beranger came in and basically pulled her away that she thinks she even survived. Like she was being pulled to her death. Like that's the way it felt. But again, fortunately, she's pulled out of the castle. They go back to the cottage. Patricia, had her chance to calm down. And now the three of them were trying to basically decipher what just happened. Like, what can we take from this unbelievable story that Patricia has told us and what they witnessed? And what they quickly settled on was, we have a lot that we can begin to explore here, but let's focus on that evil entity, that tall man in the rusted chainmail armor. Who was that? And what did he want? So she and Remy, in the hours since they had escaped the castle, had gathered up a bunch of their historical documents about the castle and laid them out on the coffee table, and they had begun going through them to try to learn about this guy. And at some point, as they were looking through all these documents, there was one particular section that, for whatever reason, just drew, Patricia's attention. She just thought, I want to look at that. And it was the section about a knight whose name was Jean, who had lived in the 14th century. And the document said that Jean had been a soldier during the 100 Years' War, which was a conflict between England and France that had started in the mid-1300s. And during that war, the castle was used as a French military fortress. And Jean was killed during a battle at the castle. And so after Patricia read this out loud to Beranger and Remy, Patricia said she just had this feeling that the evil spirit, the tall man in the armor she saw in the bathroom that scared her so much, she had a feeling that, she didn't know why, but that seemed like Jean. However, even if Patricia had been right that this evil spirit she encountered was Jean, they still didn't know, why he was there, or why he had appeared, and why he had called her to the room, or why any of this stuff had happened. The whole thing really was unexplained here. Or, who were the other ghosts who were up on the third floor? That apparently Patricia saw. None of it made any more sense. At some point, Beranger asked Patricia, what do you think? What does all this mean? Why did this happen? What do you think? But Patricia, she really was still very shaken up by this. She was this, renowned psychic medium, but again, she had never had an experience like this. This was really terrifying. And she just was like, look, I'm overwhelmed. I need to go home. I need to go home and just think about this. I need to process what's happened here. And so, obviously Remy and Beranger, they couldn't really protest, but they also were like, man, I really don't want to be left here alone with this horrifying castle, but you do what you got to do. And Patricia, she got up and she left. After Patricia left, Beranger and Remy both agreed that, despite the fact that Remy was the groundskeeper here and did need to look after the castle, that for now, it was just too dangerous to go in there. It was not worth it. And so they would stay away, at least until, Patricia came back and they could get to the bottom of this. And for a couple of days, with Remy and Beranger staying away from the castle, they had normal lives. Nothing strange happened at all. They just basically lived in their cottage and went about their lives, sort of keeping the castle over here. But after a couple of days, when still Patricia had not come back again, she was still at her home, still processing this whole thing, Beranger started having this weird feeling in her chest. It was like this need to go to the castle. Not dissimilar from how Patricia had described this overwhelming sense of being pulled up to the third floor when she was describing her whole encounter, her whole experience. Beranger, she tried to act like this wasn't happening to her, but she couldn't deny it. It's like she just had this feeling of, I gotta go to the castle, I gotta go over there. And then one day, Remy looked out the window of the cottage and he sees his wife, Beranger, walking right towards the front door of this castle. And he's thinking, there's no way she should be going in there. We agreed not to go in. What is she doing? And he literally ran over there and grabbed her and pulled her back before she went into the castle, which is exactly what she was going to do. And then when she was pulled away, she couldn't even describe why she was over there. She's like, I don't even know. I just felt like I had to come over here. I can't explain it. But that wasn't even the strangest thing that happened over these few days after the incident with Patricia. Because shortly after, Beranger almost walked back into the castle, a man had come on the castle grounds. This random man sort of wandered on to the castle grounds and was apparently being drawn, although he kind of framed it differently. He didn't really know why he was there, but he was drawn towards the castle. And as he's walking towards this castle, a deer presumably was also being drawn to the castle, and the deer went running towards the castle and actually rammed into this man and hurt him badly enough he had to be hospitalized. He actually lost an eye from being hit by this deer. And so after this happened, even though, Béranger and Remy were trying to respect Patricia, sort of giving herself some space here, because she hadn't come back, she hadn't been in touch, at this point they were like, we have to get in touch with her. Like, she's the only other person who understands, how serious this is. And so Béranger called Patricia and she said, like, whatever's going on in the castle, whatever dark energy is existing in there, it's getting stronger. Now, at first, Patricia was not inclined to come back. I mean, there was a reason she had not been in touch with them since she had left. She had basically decided, like, I don't want this in my life. This is terrifying. I don't know what happened, but I don't want this in my life. But she could just tell that, Béranger and Remy, I mean, they were at their wits' end here and they didn't know what to do. They were lost and they were turning to Patricia more like a friend, like, hey, please come back here and support us and help us get through this. And so Patricia did agree to go back. And so sure enough, the following evening, Béranger, Remy, and Patricia were back inside the castle in the second floor bathroom where Patricia had been found at the end of that horrible experience, looking up at what she believes now was Jean's ghost, this terrifying entity. And so they're in this bathroom, and Patricia had come in here in order to basically attempt an exorcism. And so she's standing in this bathroom, and sort of behind her is Béranger and Remy, and they're kind of holding each other, and Béranger is so scared she's shaking, and they're watching as Patricia, despite her own fears, she was very calm, and she was standing there with her eyes shut, and she was sort of trying to channel Jean's energy, because she didn't have that feeling being pulled, in any direction inside the castle. She was sort of choosing to channel whatever spirit was inside of this bathroom. And then at some point, Patricia appeared to sort of connect with something in the room, something that, Béranger and Remy couldn't see. The room appeared to be empty to them. But it was obvious that Patricia had sort of picked up on something, and then kind of out of nowhere, she said in this very stern, very loud voice, "Jean, show yourself." And then Béranger and Remy, they're staring at Patricia, because again, there's nothing else they can see in this room. And Patricia, she opens her eyes, and she kind of looks around the room, and then she focuses on something on the other side of the bathroom. Like, she can clearly see something, like she's seeing another entity or something. Béranger and Remy are looking, and there's nothing they can see. And then Patricia, again, still very focused, eyes locked on whatever it is in the room, she says again in that stern, loud voice, "It's over. You have to move on." Like, she's instructing, this entity, presumably Jean's entity, that he needs to go. He needs to move on. And for a second, it's just silent in the bathroom as Béranger and Remy kind of wait to see what's going to happen. Like, is Patricia going to go into another trance here? Like, what's going to happen? But Patricia, she seemed very calm, very forceful, and she's staring still towards the back of the bathroom. Nothing happens, it's silent. And then Patricia again says, "It's over. You have to move on." And this time, after the second time that, Patricia is given this command, Béranger and Remy, they heard the sound of banging on a door upstairs on the third floor, basically right above them. And then they hear the sound of shuffling footsteps all over the place, and then the sounds of mournful crying, and there's more banging, and Béranger and Remy, I mean, they're holding each other, they're so scared. Patricia's unmoved. She's just standing there, anchored in the room, and all this commotion's happening upstairs, and then suddenly they hear the distinct sound of a door flying open, and then all these footsteps rushing down the hallway, mixed in with the sound of crying. But it was not crying like sad. It was blissful crying. It was tears of joy as whoever was up there was charging down the hallway, down the steps, and out of the castle. At this point, it was like a calm fell over the whole castle. And Patricia, she turned away from, whatever else was inside of the bathroom, and she looked at Remy and Béranger, and she smiled, and she said, "It's over. It's okay. Everything's okay now." Patricia would tell them that she was able to actually channel the ghost that had been in the bathroom, that evil entity. And she said it was Jean, it was his ghost, and that he had been haunting their castle because he didn't know he was dead. He was stuck in a sort of purgatory where he believed he was still fighting the 100 Years' War. And so every time somebody died inside of this castle over the many, many years that he had been here, he would take their spirit prisoner up in that room on the 3rd floor. Those were prisoners. But Patricia, during this exorcism, had said to him, it's over. Like, the war is over. It's time to move on. And he understood that she was saying the war is over. And at that point, Jean is the one who freed the prisoners on the 3rd floor. That was the sound of all the prisoners being released. They were all so happy and they fled the castle. And then at that point, Jean himself, his spirit, was finally able to rest. However, there's one more wrinkle to this story, which is shortly after the exorcism, when life sort of returned to normal for all parties, Patricia and Béranger were speaking, and Patricia at some point just kind of offhandedly said something like, it's a good thing, Béranger, that you texted me again and got me to come back out here, because clearly I was able to help you guys. I was able to, free these spirits from the castle. What a good thing it was that you texted me again. And Béranger said, what do you mean? And Patricia was like, when you texted me about how the castle was sort of calling me, you were right. Like, clearly it was. And I came over and we took care of it. But Béranger was like, I haven't texted you in months. I didn't send that text message. And Patricia, she pulled out her phone and she showed her the text where it was like, the castle is calling you, come. And Béranger was like, yeah, I didn't send that to you. And to this day, Patricia, Béranger, and Remy still have no idea who sent that text to Patricia.
A quick note about our stories. They are all based on true events, but we sometimes use pseudonyms to protect the people involved, and some details are fictionalized for dramatic purposes. The MrBallen podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories, is hosted and executive produced by me, MrBallen. Our head of writing is Evan Allen. Our head of production is Zach Levitt. Produced by Jeremy Bone. Research and fact-checking by Shelley Shue, Samantha Van Hoos, Evan Beamer, Abigail Shumway, and Camille Callahan. Research and fact-checking supervision by Stephen Ear. Audio editing and post-produced by Whit Lacasio, Jordan Stidham, and Cole Lacasio. Mixed and mastered by Brendan Kane. Production coordination by Samantha Collins. Production support by Antonio Manata and Delana Corley. Artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Theme song called Something Wicked by Ross Bugden. Thank you for listening to the MrBallen podcast. If you enjoyed today's story and you want to hear more like it, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, just called MrBallen, where we have hundreds more stories, a lot like this one, but most of them are not available on this podcast. They are only available on that YouTube channel, which again is just called MrBallen. So that's going to do it. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, see ya. Today's podcast features two classic scary stories. The audio from both of these stories has been pulled from our main YouTube channel and has been remastered for today's episode. The links to the original YouTube videos are in the description. The first story you'll hear is called Who Was Calling, and it's about a series of disturbing 911 phone calls that police dispatchers started receiving in Nevada. The second story you'll hear is called The Capitol Theater Haunting, and it's about 3 police officers who independently witnessed the same paranormal event in Utah. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the Strange, Dark, and Mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right podcast, because that's all we do, and we upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday. So, if that's of interest to you, please put the Amazon Music follow button's feet in cement and then throw them in the ocean. Okay, let's get into our first story called Who Was Calling? "911 dispatchers hear a lot of interesting stories coming from the other end of the phone. But one group of dispatchers out of Reno, Nevada may win the award for the creepiest 911 calls ever received. When the details of these calls they got were put online, the internet went crazy. Here is their story. There was this old couple that lived about 20 miles east of Reno, Nevada. In 2010, the husband dies, leaving the wife all alone in this house. Shortly after his passing, she began calling 911 2-3 times a week, requesting things like, can you please put some water on to boil? Hey, can you change the thermostat? It was clear she was showing signs of dementia, and the dispatchers were respectful of her and gently told her that this is 911, you can only call if it's an emergency, and at some point the woman would understand her mistake and she would say sorry and she would hang up. No first responders were ever sent out for these calls because it didn't seem like an emergency, it just seemed like a confused elderly person. But no matter how many times they told her, she kept calling back, and eventually her calls took a turn. Instead of calling 911 to ask for help with mundane tasks around the house, she would call 911 believing she was talking directly to her deceased husband, John. The dispatcher would pick up and the woman would say, John, where are you? John, John. By this time, the dispatchers had gotten so many calls from this woman, they would recognize her address coming through, and they knew what to expect. They would answer the phone, they'd be respectful, and they would tell her, like they always did, this is 911, you can't call here, you need to talk to your family. And again, they did not send a responding unit out to her because it just seemed like she was confused, not in any danger. But one day when she called, she sounded frantic and scared. John, please come home, help me, I need help, John, come home. This time, they would send first responders out to the woman's house. When the responding unit arrives at her house just minutes after she had placed the 911 call, they go to the door and they're knocking and they're yelling for her and she's not coming to the door and it's all quiet in the house. The door is unlocked, so they open it up and they announce themselves. They walk inside and immediately they can tell the heat is not on because it's very, very cold inside the house. They look around the first floor and they can't find her and there's no sign of a struggle or any obvious problems that could have happened inside of the house. So they go upstairs and they start searching all the rooms and no one's there until they get to the last room and it's the bedroom. They go inside and there's an older woman who's lying on the bed and she's clearly deceased and has been for several hours because rigor mortis had already set in. The police are able to confirm that the woman who's lying on the bed is the same woman who owns the house and lives there. And at this point, they call back to dispatch and they tell them, hey, the woman that you claim made this 911 call, well, it can't have been her. Because based on rigor mortis, she was dead at the time that 911 call was made. But the dispatchers are like, no way. We know what she sounds like. We speak to her multiple times a week. We have a whole protocol built when we see her address come across because we speak to her so often. That 911 call that you got that led you to that house where she was, that call was made by her. What they ultimately decide is the reason for this discrepancy is she didn't have rigor mortis. She was just stiff because it was really cold inside of her house, and that she had died in those couple of minutes between leaving the 911 call and when officers arrived. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're a little freaked out. A few days go by and another call is placed to 911 coming from that woman's home address. The dispatcher sees that and has to do a double take, like that's not possible. But they're thinking, okay, this could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be anything. Picks up the phone and she's shocked when it's the same woman who is frantically yelling for John to come here, save me, help me, I need help. And the dispatcher, who's well aware of the history and well aware that this woman's supposed to be dead, stays calm, goes through the procedure, tries to get more information from this woman, but the call ends abruptly and there's no more information to be had. And so not knowing what else to do, she asks a responding unit to go check this house out. The responding unit goes over to the property, they knock on the door, no one's inside, the door is actually still open, they go in, the house is empty, there's no one there, there's no one that could have made that call. At this point, dispatch is like, okay, this has got to be a prank. But the next day, same thing happens. Here comes a call from the dead woman's house. They pick it up and it's this distraught woman yelling for help. I need my husband. And the dispatcher is trying to get more information, but they can't. And then the line cuts out. Once again, they have to send responders to this location because this woman has called 911 and is saying that she needs help. And once again, the officers get to the house and it's vacant. Just like when she was alive, these calls would persist multiple times a week. They continued even after her house was broken into and burned to the ground. There's not even a house anymore. And there are still calls coming through from that address to 911. Finally, the police get in touch with the phone company and they explain the situation, and the phone company looks at their records and they say, actually, her phone line was disconnected almost immediately after she was deceased. But they tell police there's a chance that it might not have been disconnected properly at the site, and that could be a reason why it's still working. So they send a lineman to go check out the actual property to confirm her lines were disconnected properly and that no wires were getting crossed. And he said all of it checked out. Everything has been detached this whole time. The phone company thought perhaps there was a digital recording of her that got trapped in their system and was randomly bouncing to their call center. But the dispatchers would say, it doesn't sound like a recording that's playing the same every single time. It's always the same message. She's yelling for her husband to come save her. But the way she sounds is always different. It's a unique phone call every single time. So because there wasn't a definitive explanation for why this was happening, they had to treat each call like it was serious. And so multiple times a week for a year, they received these ghost calls and had to send out responding officers to check on her. Even though the house was gone and there was nothing there and there was never anyone there. It was just a vacant lot. And then finally, a year after this woman has died, the calls just abruptly stopped. And the police did not launch an investigation into what it was, because the reality is police need to prioritize things that are threats to people or places. And this really wasn't either of those things. It was just really bizarre. And so the official explanation for how a dead woman could be calling 911 from a non-existent phone line in a non-existent house for a year is, we don't know. Our next and final story is called The Capitol Theater Haunting. In 2006, Dave Murphy had just become a police officer in Salt Lake City, Utah. His first role was as a protective service officer, which meant he'd be in charge of physical security at a number of the county facilities. Dave's first facility was the Capital City Theater, which is a landmark inside of Salt Lake City. It's been around since the early 1900s. It's this beautiful, grand theater. So in early August, Dave reports to the Capital City Theater for his first day on the job, and he meets his partner, an officer by the name of Morgan Matthews. He gets there on this first day, and right away, Dave would say that Morgan was just strictly business. The first place that Morgan takes Dave is the control room, which sits on the first floor of the theater. The theater had 3 floors, and then it also had a basement as well. So the control room was on that first floor. Inside of the control room were all of the security monitors, because there was all these cameras set up inside of the theater. The cameras weren't great though. You pretty much could only tell what was in frame if there was a light on, and most of the time at night especially, lights were off. Once they were done looking at the control room, Morgan says to Dave, now we're going to go do our rounds. This is something we do every time you get to the theater. You do a security round and make sure everything's locked, all the lights are off. Before you come back to the control room, you'll do that at the beginning of your shift and at the end of your shift. Morgan brings Dave downstairs, and it's the first time Dave is seeing the basement, and he's shocked by how big it is. It is this massive hallway that stretches way down. In the middle of the hall is a piano that's just sitting out in the middle, and the lighting's not good down there. This is a very old theater. Everything in the building was pretty old. And Dave remembers thinking that he was immediately creeped out by this scene, this long hallway with all these doors and this piano right in the middle of the hallway. And he's thinking to himself, I don't want to spend much time down here. This is so creepy. But they go down the hall, they check all the doors, they make their way up to the main floor, the second floor, the third floor, everything gets checked. And so after they do this security round, Dave and Morgan go back to the control room, and Dave is anticipating getting to know Morgan a little bit. This is their first night. They're going to be working together a lot. And Dave would say that Morgan just seemed really cold and just did not want to talk to Dave very much. And as soon as their shift was almost over, Morgan was very eager to just knock out the security rounds and just get out of that building. At the end of that night, Dave remembers thinking that there's just something off about Morgan's behavior. It seemed like Morgan really didn't like being in the theater. And it would turn out that he was onto something, because Morgan didn't like being in that building. But it would take him a while to share with Dave why. Over the next couple of days, Morgan and Dave would do their security rounds together, because Dave's in training, Morgan's teaching him. But on August 9th, which is 2 days after Dave's first day on the job, Morgan was confident that Dave knew how to secure the whole building. And so at the end of the night, he tells Dave, why don't you do the security rounds yourself? Dave feels very confident that he knows how to do it. He goes down into the basement, makes sure all the doors are shut and locked, that the lights are off, finishes the basement, goes up to the first floor where the control room is and checks all the rooms on that floor. He goes into the main auditorium space. He's checking all the different nooks and crannies to make sure there's nobody hiding in there. He goes up to the second floor. He checks all the different rooms up there and the balcony, makes his way up to the third floor where there's all the offices of staff that work at the theater. At the end of the search, the last room he would check was the rehearsal room. And it was the only room where there was no door to it. So you'd poke your head in, kind of look around, make sure no one was in there, and then you would leave, and that's the end of your check. So Dave gets to the rehearsal room, he flips the light on, and he looks inside, doesn't see anybody, is satisfied that no one's in there, turns the light off, and as he's about to turn back into the hallway, he hears a door slam with tremendous force right across the hallway from where he was, and it was the bathroom door. And his first reaction is someone just ran out of the bathroom. Someone who had snuck into the building must have run out of the bathroom, and they're making a break for it to get out of the theater before I catch them. And so he instinctively picks up his radio and he calls to Morgan and says, someone's on the 3rd floor. But when Morgan looks at the camera, he doesn't see anybody. At this point, Dave's drawn his weapon, and he's looking down the hall. He doesn't see anybody. And as he's waiting for Morgan to come upstairs to back him up so they can go look for this person that's just ran down the hall, he realizes 2 things. One, just because he heard the door slam doesn't mean they left and slammed it. They could be in the bathroom. And so he's thinking to himself, someone could be in the bathroom right now. Maybe that's why we didn't see him on the camera. And then the second thing he thought of is that door, the bathroom door, can't slam. It's got this huge hydraulic hinge to it. It can't slam. So his gun is drawn and he's aiming it at the bathroom door right as Morgan comes up on his right. Morgan draws his pistol. He's got it on the door as well. And they make entry into the bathroom. They clear all the different spaces in the bathroom and no one's in there. And there's no way to get out of there. Morgan and Dave are like, okay, well, they must not have come in here. They must have run out of the bathroom. They're somewhere in the theater. And so they decide they're going to search the entire building and find this person that clearly was just in the bathroom, and that's how they slammed the door. We're not going to worry about how they slammed the door with the hydraulic hinge. We just know it was slammed somehow. So they leave the bathroom, guns still drawn, and they start making their way down the hall. They're checking all the doors. Everything is locked. When they start making their way downstairs to the 2nd floor, Dave recognizes through the door, because there's a door leading onto the 2nd floor, he can see that the lights are on, and he had turned them off. And so as they're walking down the stairs, he says to Morgan, hey, did you turn the lights on the 2nd floor? And Morgan's like, no. And so they think that whoever was here, whoever was in the bathroom is on the 2nd floor. They must have turned the lights on. They go into the 2nd floor, and not only are the lights on, but all the doors on the 2nd floor had been opened. They search the entire 2nd floor. They search every single room. No one's on the 2nd floor. They turn off the lights. They shut all the doors. Everything's locked. When they went down to the 1st floor, everything was the way it should have been. Locked, lights off, nothing down there. And they go down to the basement. And even though it was creepy being down there because they've now searched the whole building and they're anticipating coming in contact with whoever is here, assuming they haven't left the building yet. And there's no one down there. They decided to review the footage from the 3rd floor to see if they could pick up someone running in the hall around the time that door slammed. But the camera was not trained on the bathroom door. So you just have this view down the hall. You can't see the bathroom specifically, not to mention the hallway is dark and the cameras are terrible without light. And so all they're able to see is the light go on in the rehearsal room while Dave is doing his last check in there. The lights turn off because Dave's about to turn around. And then after that, you just hear this massive slam of this door, but you can't see what happened. So they don't know what to make of it. They're both very much on edge that someone might still be in the building. And so they do another sweep of the building and no one's there. And so they decide to just chalk it up and say, we were hearing things and seeing things. I'm sure it's fine. Let's just get out of here. And they leave. A couple of days later, on August 11th, Morgan is working alone. Dave wasn't coming in that day, so Morgan's alone in the theater doing a shift. And at some point in the night, as he's sitting in the control room, he thinks he hears whispering in the hall right behind him. And so after the experience he had with Dave a couple nights ago, he's on edge. So he draws his pistol right away. And so he goes out into the hallway, and immediately when he steps into the hall, the whispering seems to go farther and farther away from him down the hall. So he gets out there, he's looking around, he can't see anything. He makes his way down the hallway towards the stairs that go down into the basement, or if he wanted to go up to the 2nd floor. And when he gets to the top of the stairwell, he's gun drawn, looking down, looking up. He hears what sounds like coughing coming from the basement. And at this point, Morgan said that he was actually pretty scared. I mean, imagine being alone in this theater. Just a couple of days earlier, you've had this weird experience with slamming doors and doors being opened and lights going on that somebody else, another police officer, witnessed with you. You're alone in this theater and you're hearing coughing coming from the basement after hearing voices behind you. That's pretty terrifying. So he very slowly starts going down the stairwell. He's getting ready to clear the corner, and just as he does, the coughing stops. He turns the lights on and he looks down the hall and there's nothing there. He starts making his way down the hall. He's checking every door, making sure it's locked, making sure that everything is secure. And he gets all the way down the hall. And as he's almost done checking the basement, he smells smoke, and it's coming from a door right next to him. And so he unlocks that door and he goes in, and there's no fire. But all he can smell is smoke. So he turns the light on. He's looking around. There's no fire. He's convinced that somewhere down in the basement there's a fire. He goes to every single room and he keeps checking, and there's nothing. And then at some point the smoke smell dissipates. He checks every space in the theater to look for a fire, and there's no fire. He's wondering if he should call the fire department, but he's thinking, what would I tell them? There's no fire. And so he ultimately, after checking 3-4 times and being very confident there wasn't a fire, he just says, okay, no fire. I guess I was just smelling things. A few weeks later, on September 4th, Dave has just arrived at the theater. He's there a little bit early. Their shift started at 5 p.m. He was there at about 4:30. And when he walked into the building, he sees that there are 3 staff members sitting at the front desk talking to each other. And as he walks past, one of them is talking about ghosts inside of the theater. And it immediately piques his interest. And so he walked over to the guy talking about ghosts and he introduced himself. And it turned out that this guy was a man named Blair Fuller, who was a senior accountant at the theater. And so Dave asked Blair, what are you talking about with ghosts in the theater? Because I provide physical security here and I've seen some strange things here. I just love to hear what you have to say about it. So they head up to the 3rd floor where Blair's office was, and they sit down, and Blair says, okay, I got a doozy for you. This happened to me a couple years ago. I was actually in this office. It was about 9-10 o'clock at night. I was doing some work and I heard the elevator kick on. Now, the elevator was right outside of his office, and anytime it was on, the engine was really loud. It was really obvious if the elevator was moving around. And so he's doing his accounting work and he hears that engine kick on. He doesn't think much of it, but then it clicks that he's the only one in the building. And so he kind of looks out the glass window of his office. He had a closed door office with 2 windows looking out into the foyer where there's this elevator, and he looks out and he can see that the little lights above the elevator showing what floor it's on have lit up and it's going up. So the elevator was in the basement and now it's in the 1st floor, the 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The door's open and there's no one there. And at this point, Blair says that he wasn't concerned. He figured, okay, maybe there's some maintenance, maybe it's scheduled to do that, who knows? But after a little while, the alarm goes off in the elevator to signify that something is obstructing the door from shutting. And he's like, there's nothing obstructing the door. Why isn't it shutting? And so he leaves his office and he kind of walks over to the elevator and he walks into the elevator. And he said immediately he felt this massive drop in temperature inside of the elevator. And as he's standing there, he turns around. Now he's looking back towards his office inside of the elevator. The doors start to shut. And for whatever reason, he said, I didn't get off. I just decided I'm going to ride this elevator. The basement button lights up as if someone had pressed basement, and they start going down. And he's sitting there thinking, what in the world is going on? It was just on an alarm because the door wasn't shutting. And then miraculously, when I go inside of it, it suddenly works again, and it's going to the basement. So he goes to the basement, the door opens, no one there. He steps out, and Blair says that it took all of his courage to yell out, hey, is anyone down here? And as soon as he did, and he didn't hear a response, he said he didn't want to make any more sound. The elevator sat in the middle of the hall in the basement. It's that huge hall with that piano sitting right in the middle. The lights are off. And he pokes his head down one way. There's nothing down there. He sees the piano barely from the light of the elevator. And he looks down the other way. There's no one there. And at this point, he's just so spooked. He just gets back in the elevator and he hits floor 3, floor 3, floor 3. And he's hitting like door close, door close, door close. The door closes and he goes back up to his office. He goes into his office and he shuts the door and he sits down and he's thinking like, what was that? Why did that just happen? I got to find out if they're running maintenance or something. And as he's sitting in his chair thinking about this strange experience, he hears what sounds like banging sounds coming from outside of his office in that foyer near the elevator. He just goes to his door and he opens it up and he pokes his head into the foyer and he looks to the side and there's this big filing cabinet and all of the cabinets are out. They've all been pulled out. He certainly didn't do this. And it was as if someone was one by one pushing each of them shut, these big heavy cabinets. And he's watching as one by one these things are slamming shut, one by one until the whole thing is shut. And so he goes over and he's like trying to disprove what he just saw, that he can open up a drawer and that it will shut on its own. But none of them shut on their own. You have to shut it. Something has to shut it for it to shut. And so he packed up for the day and left and did not work another night shift at the theater. Later that night, Dave would share Blair's story with Morgan.
He wasn't really sure how Morgan was going to react, but Morgan actually would open up and he would say, before you started working here, I always felt like I was being watched when I was here. And then we had that experience, obviously, where the lights are coming on and you heard that banging from that bathroom door. And then just a few days ago, I heard voices coming from the hall and I heard someone coughing in the basement and I smelled smoke and there was no one there. And so they start going back and forth, exchanging stories of just how uncomfortable this place made them feel. And so they're wondering what they should do about this. And Dave has this idea. He's like, my best friend, I'll invite him to come over here one night and we'll tell him that we're giving him a tour of the building and we'll just see what he says. We'll see if he reacts to anything here. Who knows? Maybe something strange will happen and then we'll have another person validate it. Morgan thinks that's a good idea. And so Dave reaches out to his best friend, Greg. Greg would say that he was a little bit surprised to be getting this offer to come take a tour of the theater, but he was interested, and since Dave was asking, he figured he would oblige him, and so Greg agrees to come to the theater and take a tour. So the next day, Dave and Morgan are at the theater, and Greg shows up, and so they start this tour. They go in the main auditorium, they're looking around, and they make their way into the basement. Morgan turns on the light, and Morgan and Dave instantly see, a little ways down the hall on the left, one of the doors has been opened. And so Dave and Morgan push Greg out of the way. They draw their pistols and they're aimed at the open door. And so Greg just stays behind them as Morgan and Dave make their way down to this open door. And when they get right outside the door and they're about to push it open to go inside, the door slams shut right in front of Greg and Dave and Morgan. And they all are looking at each other like, what's going on? But before they can do anything, the door handle starts rattling really aggressively. After the rattling stops, Dave and Morgan look at each other and they nod their head like, we got to go in there. Greg is scared about being out in the hall alone, and so he just follows them in. And so the three of them go into this room. Dave and Morgan are, pistols drawn. It's a small room. There's no one in there. Light switch on, no one in there. Greg suddenly gasps and he points to the corner and he says, someone's sitting in the corner. And Dave and Morgan immediately train their guns on what's in the corner, but no one's there. And Greg's like, I just saw someone sitting in the corner. It looked like he had a hood on, he had like a sweatshirt on, I don't know, but he was right there. And so Dave and Morgan, they're freaked out because they brought Greg here on some level to disprove the strangeness. And now the three of them have seen a door slam that shouldn't have been open in the first place. Greg's claiming to have seen a figure sitting in the corner. This scared the crap out of all three of them. They quickly left, locked, shut off the lights, went upstairs. Greg's like, I'm out of here. Greg leaves. And Dave and Morgan are like, now what? So at this point, all the strangeness that was happening in the theater was getting reported, but it was being reported in a way that Dave and Morgan didn't seem like they were referencing something haunted, but rather someone was breaking in. Ultimately, the county installed new cameras inside of the theater. These updated cameras had infrared technology, which allowed them to see better when the lights were off. They were hoping that this would allow them to catch whoever was breaking in practically every time Dave and Morgan are on shift. So on the day that it was installed, September 15th, Morgan is working there alone. And he's sitting in the control room looking at the different cameras, and he's kind of playing around with the different screens and seeing what each of the cameras can do. And at some point, something catches his eye in one of the screens. In the main auditorium, it appeared like someone might be sitting in one of the seats, but the camera was zoomed back enough that he couldn't get a clear picture, and he didn't know what was normal in any of these cameras, because this is the first time he's looking at any of these screens. And so he's looking at the camera really closely, and he thinks he sees someone, he can't really tell, that has a hood on or a shroud on that's just sitting in the middle of the theater. And he can see clear as day a set of eyes. And before Morgan has a chance to do it, it just starts raising into the ceiling and disappears. Morgan didn't even check to see what it was. He was done. He literally quit that day. That was his last day at the theater. A couple of weeks after Morgan has quit and Dave is working alone at the theater, he's in the control room, and all of a sudden he hears a piano playing. And there's only one piano in the entire theater, and it's sitting in the basement. It's his job to protect this place, so he knows he has to go down and check because it could be some hooligan in the building somewhere. So he leaves the control room, and as he starts walking over to the stairs with his gun drawn, the music is getting louder and louder, the piano is getting louder and louder and louder. He makes his way down the steps, and as he's about to turn the corner, he hears the guard that protects the keys on the piano slam shut, and the piano stops. Then he turns around the corner and he looks, and there's no one down there. He flips on the light, no one's in the hall. He knows he's not going to find anyone down here. It's this entity that's causing all this mayhem inside of the theater. Dave's seen enough. He's done. He's done with this theater, and he goes right back upstairs. He goes in the control room, locks it, stays there till the end of the shift, and then he is out. And the next day, he goes to his sergeant and he says, "You can't ever put me back inside that theater or I will quit." And so sure enough, he was transferred. Over the next 2 months, they didn't have anyone who could do full-time security at the theater. So different random officers would be there for a couple hours, a couple of days a week, until November 26th. They found another officer, a veteran police officer named Josh Thomas, who was going to be working at the theater full-time. On November 26th, the first night that Josh Thomas was going to be there, he didn't have anyone to turn over with, so he was just alone at the theater. And it just so happens that Dave is in a patrol car near the theater. And when at some point in the night, Josh comes over the radio and says, "Hey, I need backup right now. Someone has broken into the theater." Dave knows that it's probably not someone breaking in. He knows what's going on inside that theater. He was the closest to it. And even though he did not want to go, he felt like it was his responsibility to go to that theater and be Josh's backup. And if it was what Dave thought it would be, this entity in the theater, that he would be able to explain to him what he had seen before he ultimately decided never to go back. And when Dave gets to the theater, there's this back door that they would go into, and he sees Josh is standing just outside the theater. And Dave would say that Josh's eyes were, like saucers. He looked terrified. And so Dave has an inkling of what's going on, and he goes over to Josh and he's like, "What's going on? Is someone still in there?" He said that he had been doing security rounds and he had heard what sounded like voices when he was in the basement, and he didn't think much of it. He checked all the rooms, everything was shut. And when he made his way up to the 3rd floor, he saw that the elevator had kicked on. It was in the basement, and suddenly the light was on and it was roaring up to the 3rd floor. And when the elevator opened up, there was no one there. And he's standing there looking at it, and he looks inside, there's no one there, and then the alarm goes off. That's when he called in for backup. Dave says, "Look, let's just go search the building, we'll do it together." They clear the whole theater, no one's there. And before Dave leaves, they go into the main auditorium where the stage is, and they're just standing on the stage, chatting with each other. And Dave, his back is to where the audience would be. And Josh is facing Dave, facing towards the seats. Josh just suddenly stopped. Mid-sentence, he's just frozen and looking just beyond Dave's shoulder. And Dave goes, "What?" And Josh goes, "There's something behind you." Dave slowly turns around, and as soon as he does, he can tell immediately what Josh is looking at. Standing in the very back of the theater away from them is a man standing in the corner with its hands by its sides. Its back is to them, and it's looking down with a hood over its head. Dave turns his whole body around to look at this thing right as this thing turns around real quick and looks directly at them. It has these deep, dark, sunken eyes, and its face looks like it had been very badly burned, like it was black and charred. And it's looking at them before it just turns and runs out the back of the theater. Josh believed that that was an intruder. Dave was fairly certain that that was just another example of this entity that haunts the theater. But they would search the building and they could never find that cloaked figure again. And that was when Dave sat Josh down in the control room and he filled him in on why Morgan had quit and why he ultimately had quit. And he also told him the story from Blair. So Josh is like, "Great, I'm glad I work here now." This was the last time that Dave would go to the theater. But Dave would do some additional digging on the history of the theater. It would turn out that in the 40s, there was this horrible fire, and a man had been trapped in the basement when the fire had erupted, and he had died inside of the theater. And so Dave would share this information with Morgan and with Josh, and the three of them all believed that what they were witnessing was the ghost of that man who died in that fire.
Thank you for listening to the MrBallen podcast. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, please put the Amazon Music follow button's feet in cement and throw them in the ocean. This podcast airs every Monday and Thursday morning, but in the meantime, you can always watch one of the hundreds of stories we have posted on our main YouTube channel, which is just called MrBallen. We have a registered 501c3 charitable organization called the MrBallen Foundation that honors and supports victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the MrBallen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Lastly, we have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. So that's going to do it. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, see ya.
Hey guys, I'm back by the fire and I have another awesome story to share with you. Today's story is this epic survival story, and I mean the story itself is truly unbelievable, but I'm telling you, the twist at the end, basically how this person was able to survive, you will not see coming. Great plot twist, great story, I know you're gonna like it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right campfire, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the follow button to come on down to your campfire. But when they get there, just immediately push them into the flames and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Around 10 a.m. on March 18, 1944, a 26-year-old Finnish soldier named Aimo Koivunen sat around a campfire with a group of other soldiers inside of the Arctic Circle in Northern Europe. They were very deep into the wilderness in this forest that was covered in several feet of snow, and Aimo was melting a pot of that snow over the fire so the group could drink some tea. And at the same time that Aimo was doing this, even though it was kind of relaxing to be sitting here, Aimo, his whole body was basically aching. Number one, it was 5 degrees outside, and this was also the first time that he and the other soldiers had stopped to rest in about 2 days. They had been on the move the whole time. At this point, during World War II, they were allied with Nazi Germany. Not because, they were Nazis, they were not, but because Finland and Germany shared a common enemy, the Soviet Union. Right now, Aimo and his squadron were in an area called Lapland, which used to belong to Finland. But 4 years earlier, the Soviet Union had invaded Finland and ultimately forced Finland to cede this land to the Soviets. But now, during World War II, Finland wanted to get their land back, and Germany was helping them do that. And so Aimo and his squadron were in Lapland on essentially a reconnaissance mission. They were there to try to figure out sort of what the Soviets were doing in this part of Lapland and how many Soviets were out there, again, in this particular part of Lapland. However, Aimo and the others had spent the past 2 days skiing all over the place in their area of operations, but so far, they hadn't seen any Soviet soldiers or any Soviet bases. But, for Aimo, and probably for the other soldiers that he was with, this was ultimately a good thing. They were trained for combat, but they didn't necessarily want to come across Soviets and have like a full-blown shootout, in part because the Soviets were just a bigger, more well-equipped military. And, they were also more advanced. And so if they got into a gunfight with them, who knows what would have happened? And so even though Aimo is like sitting here feeling very sore and very tired as he melts his snow, he was ultimately feeling kind of grateful that this reconnaissance mission had proven to be pretty low-key. However, just as the water began to boil, Aimo and the other soldiers heard the unmistakable sound of machine gun fire coming from somewhere that had to be nearby. And so immediately Aimo and the others, they jump up, forget what they're doing, and they're looking to see where this gunfire is coming from. But then before they could even make sense of the situation, Aimo's lieutenant yelled like, "Hey, get ready, get your guns." And so they all scooped up their weapons. Aimo, he's picking his weapon up, and as he looks up, he looked off in the distance, maybe a quarter mile away, and he was shocked to see an entire pack of Soviet soldiers bearing down on them. They were literally skiing down this mountainside right nearby, and they were obviously shooting their machine guns, not in random directions, but right at Aimo and the other men. They were clearly being attacked by these Soviets. Now, Aimo and the other men have clearly been trained for this. This is literally why they're out here. They are soldiers. They're ready for this type of encounter. But for a moment, when Aimo sees this overwhelming force that's descending on them, they're clearly outnumbered, like this is going to end badly. All Aimo had in his head was just this overwhelming feeling of just terror. He was the oldest of 6 children, And when he first enlisted in the military, he had promised all of his little siblings that he wouldn't get hurt. He would come home. He would be okay. And now he knew that wasn't going to happen. Like, he was going to get killed. He just knew it. But at this point, IMO, he looked over at his lieutenant to get orders. But IMO, after sort of breaking out of this initial thought, he looked over at his lieutenant, and his lieutenant looked terrified too. But he quickly composed himself and yelled for IMO and everybody else to flee. Just moments later, IMO and the other Finnish soldiers were on their skis, skiing as fast as they could away from the Soviets down the backside of this mountain, just doing anything they could to survive. And as IMO is skiing away, he can hear the sound of gunfire ricocheting off trees, zipping by his head. Like, he's thinking, at any point, I'm going to get hit, or one of my teammates are going to get hit. There's nothing we can do. We just got to go as fast and as far as we can. And so he's skiing, and actually IMO was at the front of their formation. So he's actually leading the pack. And so really it was his job to kind of create tracks in the snow that the others could follow in behind. It was easier for them. But it meant he was expending a lot of energy, basically pushing all the snow down as he was making his escape. And as much as he wanted to maintain that position and do this for his teammates, to continue to make tracks here, it was so exhausting. And also, like, when you're in combat, you have this unbelievable adrenaline rush that sometimes can lead to like a massive crash of energy. And it was like he had this huge rush of energy, and now it's like he's collapsing. Despite the need to escape here, it's like his body just cannot go any faster than he's going. And so before long, it's like he found himself slowing down, and his teammates are zipping by him because they can't stop. The bullets are flying fast. Like, their only hope of survival is just to keep on going. And so IMO knows that, like, basically, if he can't keep up, he's dead. But his body, it was just, he couldn't go any faster. He was slowing down. He was going slower and slower. He can hear the sound of the gunfire getting closer and closer. And he's thinking about his siblings and how devastated they're going to be to find out that he was killed in this war. And so slower and slower he's going. The sounds are getting louder and louder behind him. And he sees the last of his teammates pass him. And he sees them just kind of drift off down the mountain into the white abyss beyond. And they're gone. He's alone. And he just can't keep up. And then finally he just loses control of his skis. He veers off to the side. He starts tumbling down the mountain, smashes into a tree, and he passes out. When IMO woke up, it was light outside. But he had no idea how much time had passed. He also really had no idea how he was even still alive. Like, what, did the Soviets just decide not to kill me? Or did they not see me? Like, what happened to my teammates? Like, what's going on? He had a lot of questions. But in addition to feeling confused about the whole situation, he also had this really distinct other feeling. He had this immense sense of being alert, like hyper alert, more than really he had ever been in his whole life. It's like he could hear and see everything at like a 10 times level. It's like, oh my God, I know everything going on around me. I'm totally aware. So with his like hyper vigilance that he suddenly was having sort of out of nowhere, he began to, take stock of his situation. Right away, he, was able to see that he's alone. Like, the Soviets are not nearby. He's not like being held captive. And again, his comrades are nowhere to be seen. So he's alone in the middle of the Arctic Circle, in the middle of the wilderness, which is quite bad. But he also could see that, okay, well, I still have my skis, so I can still get around. He still had his boots on. He still had his equipment on. Like, he had the things he needed to survive. He even had his compass still, which had been in his hand, but he hadn't lost it. And so he had a way to navigate. And he had his weapon still. And so he's thinking, okay, the situation's bad, but I have what I need to survive for some time. And he also realized that, sort of amazingly, despite clearly crashing as a minimum and smashing into this tree that he was laying near, despite that, he didn't feel any pain in his body. And he didn't appear to have any injuries. So he's thinking, what a miracle here, that the worst thing that's happened here is I've basically been abandoned and I'm effectively lost, but it could be worse. And so IMO, after taking stock of his situation, he stood up and just began looking all around him. And again, he has this hypervigilance thing going on, which, he's thinking is, the product of a huge adrenaline rush from nearly dying maybe. But either way, he's hyper aware and he's looking around. And he notices off in the distance, maybe like 6-7 miles away, there's this mountain that immediately looks familiar to him. It looks like the mountain that he and his squadron had agreed would be their rendezvous point if they got separated. And so he's looking at it thinking that's got to be it. And then he sees on this mountain, as he's kind of squinting and staring at this mountain, he sees what appears to be smoke coming off the mountain. And he's thinking, that's it. That's where my teammates have gone. Like, they haven't abandoned me. They've gone to the rendezvous point. They're going to wait for me. I just need to get to that mountain. I got my skis. I got my equipment. I don't think I'm hurt. I can do it. I'm going to get over there and I'll be saved. So Aimo scooped up his backpack and picked up his gun and whatever other equipment he had on the ground. And then he started skiing towards this mountain. And for a while, he just kept on staring up at the smoke coming off the mountain, making sure he was going in the right direction. And as he got closer, he was nearly positive he could see that in addition to the smoke, he could see what appeared to be little lean-to tents on the mountainside, which were telltale signs that those were Finnish soldiers. That's how they set up their tents. So he's thinking, this is it. Like, I'm going to be saved. I just got to get there. And he had so much energy, maybe, because he was so close to being rescued or something, but he felt like this huge surge of energy. It was like nothing could make him tired. And then finally, Aimo got close enough to this campsite on the side of this mountain that he actually could see faces. He could see the other soldiers, and they were his, Finnish comrades. They had clearly gone to the rendezvous point, and they hadn't seen him yet. And so here he is, feeling like full of energy. He's barreling towards them, and he starts calling out to them. He's thinking they're going to be like totally shocked that, anybody would just come out of the wilderness towards their campsite, let alone Aimo, who they must have assumed by this point was dead. Also, he's thinking, I don't want them to shoot at me, thinking I'm a Soviet soldier, so I better get their attention. And so he's yelling out for his comrades. And at some point, one of the men, they turn and they see Aimo, and their reaction is not what Aimo wanted. Their reaction was being really shocked, grabbing their weapon, and shooting at him. And before long, all these soldiers, all of his comrades, are opening fire on Aimo. And Aimo's like, come on, like, I'm one of you, what are you doing? But he's already going so fast, skiing so fast, that his only move was to basically ski right down the middle of their camp and just go to the other side of the mountain. And so he literally skied through this campsite with all of his comrades shooting at him, who miraculously missed him. So he doesn't get shot somehow. The bullets are whizzing past his head. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, they think I'm a Soviet. Come on, I'm calling out to you guys. I'm not a Soviet. But he barrels past them, and then after he's pretty far away from this campsite, he's yelling back to them like, guys, it's me, it's Aimo, what are you doing? But they're yelling and they're shooting in his direction, and so he had no choice but to just keep on skiing away from them, away from safety, or what he believed was going to be safety. And so on he went for hours and hours, just skiing and skiing away from this ambush, if you will. And the whole time he's thinking, like, what happened? Even if they shot at me at first, couldn't they have figured it out that, like, I'm one of you? Like, wouldn't you have realized that eventually as I skied right through your campsite? I have the same uniform as you. I have the same weapon as you. You recognize me? Like, what was that? And so he has no idea what happened, but he's like, how do I have so much energy? Like, how am I able to do this? I've been skiing for hours and hours and hours. I've been shot at so many times. Like, this is surreal. What's happening? Like, what is going on here? And so Aimo just continued skiing for hours and hours until it was abundantly clear he was not in shooting range. He didn't hear the sound of any gunfire. Like, he's safe again. Still very confused why this was even happening, but he's safe. The sun's gone down, and so he thinks, like, okay, I need to stop. I need to make camp. I need to regroup. But it was at this point that he's thinking to himself, like, I haven't eaten anything. I haven't had any water. I've basically been at a full sprint, like skiing at a full sprint here for practically the whole day. I've had multiple near-death experiences. I smashed into a tree during that initial, skirmish. But I feel great. I feel like I have more energy than I've ever had in my whole life. And so he's just caught by, like, how am I able to do this? Is this what it's like when you're in a true survival situation? Like, your body just goes into, like, overdrive or something? Like, he couldn't understand it. And so he's standing there, like, basically telling himself, you really need to stop. Even though you have the energy to go pretty much indefinitely, you need to stop, you need to make a fire, you need to have food, you need to have water, you need to rest. But it was like he was forcing himself to do these things. He didn't feel compelled to do them. It was like, oh, that's right, I need to, like, do human stuff. And so that's what he did. He stopped, he built a fire, he made some food, and he's like not hungry at all, but he's eating the food, forcing himself to. He's having some water. And then he's like, okay, I'll rest. And then in the morning, I'll figure out what to do next. But he lays down to go to sleep, and he should have been completely exhausted, but he wasn't. He couldn't even sleep, like not at all. He just laid there completely wide awake as the wind and sleet and snow whipped all around him, and he just laid there. Again, feeling great, but just not tired at all. The next morning, when the sun came up, Imo had not slept at all, but still he was able to get up, put his skis on, and get his stuff and continue skiing, basically in the direction that he believed would bring him back to Finland. And as he was skiing, he's thinking to himself, it's kind of interesting because when he first got attacked by the Soviets, it was like his mind was clear, but his body failed him. Like his legs got so tired from trying to cut those tracks in the snow that he fell off and crashed. And that sort of led him to this position. But now, for whatever reason, it was like his mind was delirious. Like he couldn't keep his thoughts straight, but his body was like a Terminator. Like he just kept on going no matter what. And so he just kept on skiing, almost like without even thinking. His body was like on autopilot. And so all day that day, Imo just skied in one direction and just didn't stop. And the whole time he's skiing, he didn't see another soul. He is out in the middle of, the Arctic Circle. There's no more Soviets. There's no more teammates, nothing. He's just out in the middle of the wilderness. And realistically, he didn't know if he was even remotely going in the right direction, but he was just going to go. But that night, as he's still just skiing in a straight line, not stopping, sort of unbelievably, he looked up ahead and he saw somebody, the first person he had seen since, the ambush at the campsite. And even more unbelievable is the person he saw was one of his teammates. It was this guy named Matty. He was a comrade of his. They had been together when the Soviets had first attacked. And so immediately Imo's thinking, like, clearly Matty got separated as well, and it's just serendipity that we have wound up at the same place. And so Imo, he skis right up to Matty, and he's waving him down. He's so relieved to see him. And Matty, when he looks over at Imo, he doesn't shoot at him, but he sort of tells him to, like, be quiet, like, calm down. And he kind of beckons him over. And when Imo comes up next to Matty, he has all these questions, like, what do we do? Where are we going? But Matty just tells him, like, just to be quiet, and then gestures to lay down on the ground. And so Imo doesn't really know what's going on here, but he trusts Matty. Matty is not shooting at him. That was a good sign. And so the two of them just laid in the snow. They laid down right there. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, Imo was able to feel tired enough that when he closed his eyes, he did drift off to sleep almost right away. When Imo woke back up again, he was not still lying down in the snow next to Matty. He was instead standing up on his skis, skiing down a mountain, like on a mission. Matty's nowhere to be found. And on top of that, he didn't have his backpack and he didn't have his gun. Had no idea how long he'd been skiing for. He didn't know like where he was going. It was like he went from passed out to skiing, just magically skiing. Now, realistically, at this point, Imo is thinking to himself, clearly what's happening here is I'm like hallucinating or something. Because how is it possible that I was just with Matty laying on the ground sleeping and now I'm here? Like, it didn't add up. And so as he's just sort of mindlessly skiing along, he's like telling himself like, this is you dying. Like, this is you losing your mind before you die. Like your mind is all over the place. Your body's still going for reasons he didn't really understand. Still at, full tilt, full energy, didn't know why. But at some point that's going to give out and you're just going to die. Like, that's what's going to happen here. And so Imo's only hope was that between now and when he died, that hopefully somebody would see him and save him. He knew it was an outside chance, but at this point, that's all he had. And so on he skied. No weapon, no backpack, no supplies. He's basically operating on no sleep, and he's just skiing. And for days and days, he doesn't stop. He can't believe his body is keeping up as well as it is. His mind is like totally gone, but he is just going for days and days and days. Doesn't run into anyone. But then one day, again, days later, he's skiing along and magically almost in front of him appears this building. He can't tell if it's necessarily a military outpost or civilian. He doesn't know if it's Finnish or German or Soviet. But he knows, even in his totally fractured mental state, that attempting to go in that building and hoping there are people in there that will save him, even if they won't, even if they kill him maybe, that is a better outcome, a better choice than doing what he's doing right now, which is the sort of endless ski to his death. And so Aimo starts skiing faster and faster towards this building, just like full reckless abandon, fully committed to this is my rescue or this is my death. And as he gets closer, he sees, sort of unbelievably, that this is a military installation, and it is a German military installation. And remember, the Finnish are allied with the Germans at this point, and so this is a safe place for him. And so he's so relieved, he can't believe he's going to potentially survive this thing. He takes off his skis, and he starts running towards the front door of this building. But before he gets to the front door, he steps on something, and then there was a loud bang, and he's thrown into the air and comes crashing down. And when Aimo opened his eyes and sort of took stock of what had happened, he didn't feel any pain, but he looked down and he saw his foot was just a bloody mess. There was literally bones poking out of his ankle. Like he could see, clearly he sustained a horrible injury, and he must have just stepped on a landmine. But Aimo, determined to get into that building, he pulled himself up, again, sort of channeling this unbelievable just endurance he had been feeling the past several days that he'd been out here. He stood up and on one foot began hobbling his way towards this installation. And he finally gets to the front door of this German military base. And he grabs the doorknob and he's about to open it when there's another banging sound and he's thrown again into the air. He had stepped on another landmine. And he comes smashing down, and he doesn't die, he doesn't feel any pain, but he looks down at his legs and he sees his other leg that was not injured a minute ago is now also mangled. So now he can't even stand. He's incapacitated. And on top of that, even though he's near this military outpost, he turns and looks at it, and now that he's a little bit closer and he's sort of looking more, intentionally at this building, he realizes it's abandoned. Like, this isn't going to save him. He's trapped. He's in the middle of nowhere, and there's no one here. And so at this point, Aimo just said, you know what? It's over. Like, I'm going to die. And so he literally just crawled his way over to this nearby ditch, let himself roll into it, and he just waited to die. He just knew it was over. But he didn't die. For days, he just laid in this ditch, like unable to die. He wanted to die. He wanted this to be over. Like, what else is he going to do? Who's going to save him? But he just watched the sun come up and set, go up, set, over and over and over. He lost track of how many days he was just laying there, again, bleeding profusely, like grievously injured. He hasn't eaten anything. He hasn't had any water. He can't believe he's still alive. He really can't believe it. And for days and days, Aimo just laid in this ditch, fully awake, fully alert, like just completely alive. It was like he wanted to die. He wanted his body to shut down and just have this end, but it's like his body wouldn't. It was still in this super intense, like hyper survival mode where his mind was a mess, but his body was just like full, stay alive, no matter what mode. And so he's just laying there, like wondering, when is this going to finally end? And it just wouldn't. Like days and days are going by. And then as he's laying there, one of these days, he's just in this ditch. He looks up during the daytime and he sees what looks like a plane flying overhead. Now, at this point, Aimo is in very bad shape. I mean, he's alive, but it's not going well. And he knows that, so he doesn't know if he's hallucinating this or what, but he felt like it was real. But after watching this plane circle overhead for a minute, Aimo was almost certain he heard the sound of this plane landing nearby. And then a couple of minutes later, he could have sworn from the ditch, he can't really see anything, he could hear the sound of people speaking in Finnish, his native language. And then a moment later, again, he didn't know if he was hallucinating or not, but he sees this head poke over the top of the ditch. And it was this young man, this young Finnish guy, and he's looking down at Aimo, and Aimo's looking back up at him. And then a second later, Aimo was being pulled out of the ditch. Later that day, Aimo found himself laying in a hospital bed inside of a hospital in Finland. Like the man in the plane, all that, not a hallucination. He really had been rescued. And once he was at the hospital, it turned out he weighed just 94 pounds. He was also badly burned and frostbitten, and both of his legs were very badly mutilated and mangled, and his heart was beating at a staggering 200 beats per minute, despite the fact he's just laying in bed, not doing anything. And even more crazy was they couldn't actually get his heart to slow down. It just kept beating at this crazy high level. Now, at first, doctors and nurses and all the staff were like really shocked by IMO's condition. Not really just that he had survived, but again, like his heart rate. Like it just seemed like, dude, how are you alive right now? Like your heart can't beat at this level for this long without eventually killing you. But after they spoke to IMO and had him recount the whole ordeal of him being out, getting shot at and lost and the whole thing, they learned one really specific thing that explained the whole thing. When IMO and his, Finnish comrades were initially ambushed by the Soviet soldiers, they decided to flee. But IMO, he was having such a hard time physically keeping up with the other soldiers. Like he was just getting so tired from trying to break the tracks, and then he fell off, and he's thinking to himself, if I don't find a way to keep up, I'm gonna get captured or get killed by the Soviets. And so he's desperate. And so before he ultimately crashed down the side of the mountain from exhaustion, he tried something to try to give himself some energy, to try to make this escape. He pulled out these special military rations that he had been issued, along with everybody else in his squadron. They were all given these rations. And the reason you take these rations is to give yourself some energy. And so he takes these rations, and he's thinking, this is going to do it. This is going to give me the boost I need to get out of here and make the escape with my teammates. But the rations didn't work. And so he did sort of completely fall off. He was so tired to the point where he literally tumbled down the side of the mountain. His teammates, they skied off, and he smashes into a tree and he passes out. However, when IMO woke up, one, he was amazed he had not been captured or killed by the Soviets, but he's realizing he's all alone and like, what's going to happen to me? And then he starts to feel like, man, I just have a lot of energy. I can see and perceive things on a level that I couldn't before. Well, that's because the military rations had kicked in. And now he had like this abundance of energy. And it allowed him to basically ski indefinitely without sleeping, without having water, without food. He gets blown up twice. His feet have been blown off, basically. He's laying in a ditch dying, but he just can't seem to die. The guy should have died like several times, but these rations did their job. They gave him all the energy he needed to survive this crazy, crazy 2 weeks in the wild. Well, the military rations, they're called Pervitin. And this drug, I don't know if it's still given to soldiers now, but probably not, because effectively what Pervitin is just pure crystal meth. And so in essence, IMO survived in the wild for all this time because he was on just a pure meth-fueled rage. He was just completely high for 2 weeks, and it saved his life. One thing to note about Pervitin is it does have two distinct downsides. One, it is incredibly addictive, and two, it creates really, really intense hallucinations. And so very likely, he did not come across his own battalion who then opened fire on him. He did not come across Maddie, his teammate out in the wild who told him to lay down. And who knows, we're not even sure if the military installation he saw was real. Like very likely all of that was just in his mind. However, the landmines, those were real. Somewhat unbelievably, IMO would make a full recovery, and he would go on to get married, he would have 9 children, and he would live to the age of 71. And as grateful as he was to the drug that did save his life, he never took Pervitin again.
A quick note about our stories. They are all based on true events, but we sometimes use pseudonyms to protect the people involved, and some details are fictionalized for dramatic purposes. The MrBallen podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories, is hosted and executive produced by me, MrBallen. Our head of writing is Evan Allen. Our head of production is Zach Levitt. Produced by Jeremy Bone. Research and fact-checking by Shelley Shue, Samantha Van Hoos, Evan Beamer, Abigail Shumway, and Camille Callahan. Research and fact-checking supervision by Stephen Ear. Audio editing and post-produced by Whit Lacasio, Jordan Stidham, and Cole Lacasio. Mixed and mastered by Brendan Kane. Production coordination by Samantha Collins. Production support by Antonio Manata and Delana Corley. Artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Theme song called Something Wicked by Ross Bugden. Thank you for listening to the MrBallen podcast. If you enjoyed today's story and you want to hear more like it, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, just called MrBallen, where we have hundreds more stories, a lot like this one, but most of them are not available on this podcast. They are only available on that YouTube channel, which again is just called MrBallen. So that's going to do it. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, see ya.